Chapter 753. Was easy to say. The marriage was rejected because Ba Dama wanted to find a better family for her children. However, the hard days had to continue. As the only man in the family, Ba Tu went out early every morning to dig coal. It was this move that allowed the family to barely survive in the first city. However, with the arrival of winter, many things in the city had to stop. The work of digging coal was not as easy as before. They wanted to find another way, but how difficult was it to find a job? Ba Tu even tried to work as a waiter in some restaurants. However, because he was tall and strong, it was useless. The reason given was that the waiter in the restaurant was too powerful and would easily scare the customers. Days passed. If this continued, the family would not be able to supply the coal. Even the last warm place would be lost. What's more, they would not be able to afford the rent and would probably be kicked out of the first city, the City of Hope. Suddenly, a recruitment notice was posted outside the city lord's mansion, as well as the recruitment of 200 young and beautiful girls and the textile bureau in the city. Finally, the city recruited soldiers. This made Ba Tu see hope in despair. How could he not be happy? Sister Kikij also heard about the establishment of the textile bureau. She was also very excited. She could support the family with her hands and earn money to treat her mother's illness. This family should be getting better and better. No. Sister, you shouldn't go to the textile bureau. Instead, you should go to the publicity team. Do you still remember that father praised your beautiful dancing more than once? When he heard that his sister was going to the textile bureau to sign up, Ba Tu immediately stopped her. Can I do it? Kikij said with some lack of confidence. You can do it. At this moment, not only Ba Tu but even her mother, Ba Dama, said at the same time. Ba Dama looked at her daughter with the loving and kind eyes of a mother and said, Kikij Ba Tu, you are in a good era. You can do it. You can. Your father's spirit in heaven will bless you. The confident eyes of her mother and brother made Kikij have an idea. She gathered her courage and said, Well, I will give it a try. If it really doesn't work, I will go to the textile bureau to find a job. Kikij didn't have much confidence. Even though she was very beautiful, she didn't dare to have any hope for anything lucky. However, happiness suddenly fell on her head, making her feel as if she hadn't woken up yet. There weren't many people signing up for the publicity office in the city. Perhaps there were too many people like Kikij who didn't have confidence in themselves. This allowed her to gain quite a bit of advantage. With her appearance, she stood out among the line of people waiting to be assessed. Reality proved that her luck wasn't bad. She caught the eye of the head of the propaganda department, Shui Qing. Shui Qing was originally a female official in Crimson Nest City's Inchuan department and was highly valued by the department head, Luan Xiaoyu. This time, when he learned that it was the sixth young master who had personally given the order, he immediately sent out his trusted subordinate. Reality proved that Shui Qing didn't disappoint. After coming to the beginning city, she quickly understood what had happened here. Then, she chose some of the most representative stories and arranged them into a program. Once it was performed, there were a lot of good reviews. It also gave the publicity office a good start. All the work quickly entered the right path. The degree of popularity was unexpectedly good. There were more and more people in the army and among the common people who wanted to watch their program. However, the manpower in the publicity office was limited. Just when Shui Qing was thinking about whether to ask for support from the headquarters in Crimson Nest City, the sixth young master spoke. He gave them the authority to recruit 200 people to join the publicity office. This was equivalent to solving her problem. In order to complete this task well and not let down the sixth young master, Shui Qing personally acted as the examiner and recruited these 200 people. With Kikij's beautiful appearance and her good dancing foundation that she had learned from her mother since she was young, she was chosen by Shui Qing and became a new member of the publicity office. When she found out that she had been chosen and that she would be able to receive a salary of 10 taels of silver every month, and that if she performed well, there would be even more rewards, Kikij was so happy that she shed tears. She turned around and ran out. She wanted to tell this good news to her mother and brother and share it with the family. Perhaps it was because Kikij was too happy that she ran too fast. When she rushed out of the door, she didn't look at anyone or anything and bumped into a man's embrace. She couldn't help but let out a delicate cry. This wasn't because Kikij was too weak and delicate. It was because his chest was too broad and too sturdy. It was like a wall, making her feel as if a meat bump had grown on her head. What's wrong with you? Don't you look at the road when you're running? A reprimanding voice sounded. The one who spoke was one of the strong man's followers. I'm sorry. I was too anxious. I apologize. Kikij also knew that it was because she was too anxious and reckless that she bumped into someone, even though she might be the one who was injured. But the past few years of experience had made her used to swallowing her anger. As she spoke, in order to show her respect, Kikich took the initiative to raise her head when she said, "I apologize." This allowed her to see the person she bumped into. This person was about 1.9 meters tall and weighed about 200 kilograms. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was as tall as a horse. But as soon as she raised her head, Kikich immediately lowered her head, as if she didn't have the courage to look at him. She could only see the rough outline of the other party, but when she raised her head, the other party saw her clearly. So beautiful. This was the only thought in the tall man's heart. Although this woman's looks aren't as good as the other madams, she's much better than the others. Especially with her tear-stained face, it's easy for people to feel pity for her. Beta Persei, who was standing there, couldn't help but think in his heart. The person who came was Beta Persei. Yang Chendong considered that today was the recruitment day of the publicity department and wondered if anyone would come here to cause trouble. After all, there were only girls here and it wouldn't be good if they were scared. Thus he sent Beta Persei over to take a look. With this person here, no one would dare to cause trouble here. Unexpectedly, as soon as Beta Persei arrived, Kikich bumped into him. His skin was rough and his flesh was thick, so of course nothing happened to him. But Kikich actually cried, which made Beta Persei feel a little embarrassed. After apologizing, Kikich didn't hear Beta Persei's response and wanted to leave. Anyway, she had already apologized. The other party was a man, so he wouldn't make things difficult for her. It was said that snatching beauties often happened in other places, but it had never been heard of in the first city, which was ruled by law. This was also the reason why her mother dared to firmly reject the neighbor who wanted to take her as a concubine. Kikich wanted to leave, and her feet involuntarily walked to the side. However, an outstretched arm blocked her. The person who stopped her was none other than Beta Persei. When he saw the other party crying, he thought that he was the one who caused it, so he wanted to apologize. What are you doing? If you continue like this, I'm going to shout for help." A big hand blocked her way, scaring Kikich so much that her whole body was about to shrink into a ball. She was already thinking about whether she should return to the publicity department. She remembered that Director Shui Qing seemed to have a good impression of her. I'm fine. I just want to ask why you're crying. Did I cause it? Well, I've been practicing martial arts all year round, so my body is a little too strong. I must have hurt you. Beta Persei faced Kikich and said incoherently. He didn't know how long it had been since he felt this way. Even when facing Yang Chendong, Beta Persei could answer smoothly most of the time and smile as usual. But for some reason, facing a strange girl today, he actually felt a little flustered. I'm fine. Can you please move aside? After Kikich heard Beta Persei's words, she knew that he was not a bad person. But that was all. She still had urgent things to do, such as going home to report the good news. Oh. Beta Persei heard that Kikich was fine, so he put his hands down. But before the other party was about to walk past him, he suddenly straightened his arms and said, "Miss, my name is Beta Persei. If you feel unwell or have other troubles, you can come to the Yang Mansion to find me. I can do my best to help." Yang Mansion? When she heard this name, Kikich finally couldn't help but raise her head again. There was no one in the beginning city who didn't know where the Yang Mansion was. It was the place where the great Ming Dynasty's Duke of Loyalty and the Messenger of Tingri Heaven stayed. Those who could live there gave people a sense of mystery. She didn't expect this man to stay there. Kikich raised her head again, and Beta Persei saw her clearly again. Beautiful, you're beautiful. This was Beta Persei's second impression. Kikich seemed to feel that Beta Persei's gaze was a little hot, so she lowered her head again. Thank you for your concern. I'm fine. Can I leave now? Oh yes. Beta Persei really had no reason to stop the other party, so he had to take a step back and make enough space for Kikich to trot past him. Kikich had already left, but Beta Persei's gaze was still following her. When the figure could no longer be seen, Captain Dao Zhao's voice sounded beside him. Brother Beta Persei, she's gone. If you like, I'll send my brothers to follow her and see where she lives. What's her name? Oh, forget it. Being teased by his brothers, Beta Persei couldn't help but blush. He then shook his head and strode into the door of the publicity office. Although he didn't send anyone to inquire about Kikich, Beta Persei still paid attention to it because he found that the girl's figure always appeared in his mind from time to time, and he couldn't let it go. Fortunately, he didn't forget what the mission was this time. He quickly entered the publicity office and came to the recruitment site. Chapter 754. As soon as he entered, his bulky figure quickly attracted the attention of many people. Director Shui Qing also saw Beta Persei at the first moment and hurriedly came over to greet him. This was the person beside the sixth young master, and he was also a popular person. He absolutely could not be offended. "Brother Beta Persei, why do you have time to inspect our small yamen?" Shui Qing walked over with a smile on her face. Originally, she wanted to call Beta Persei master just like how the people in Crimson City called Yang Wu. However, after someone called Beta Persei that way, he was scolded. What a joke, the sixth young master was only a duke, how dare they call him master? For this matter, he personally sent a telegram to Yang Wu in Crimson City, severely criticizing him. Yang Wu was also somewhat wronged. He did not request to be called Master Yang Wu, but the people below took the initiative to call him Master Yang. However, even with Beta Persei's angry reprimand, Yang Wu also asked everyone in Crimson City to call him Yang Wu in the future. If not, they could call him Brother Yang Wu. Anyway, Master Yang Wu was not allowed. Whoever called him that could only be punished. After seeing Shui Qing, Beta Persei also asked with a smile on his face with concern, "How is it? Is everything normal here? Did anyone come to make trouble?" "Why would anyone come to make trouble? This is the beginning city. Are the patrols that can be seen casually on the streets useless?" Shui Qing pursed her lips and chuckled. Beta Persei also chuckled. The safety of the beginning city had always been the most important. Even if it had begun to snow, the security and defense of the city was still the same as usual. Every 10 minutes or so, a patrol of at least 10 people would appear on the streets. Not only that, the streets in the city had always been very clean. Even if the heavy snow was still falling, the snow that had covered the ground a moment ago would be swept out in the next moment. This showed how frequent the patrols were. The beginning city was surrounded by grasslands and was surrounded by Mongolians. The slightest carelessness might cause unknown things to happen. In order to achieve a deterrent effect, the patrols on the streets were more frequent. "By the way, how's the recruitment today? How many good seedlings are there?" Beta Persei didn't dwell on the issue of public security. Instead, he asked about the recruitment of the publicity department. Shui Qing knew that this was probably the sixth young master's intention. He wanted to find out more about them, so she answered truthfully, "The situation isn't too good. Although there are quite a lot of people here, most of them aren't in good condition, especially their skin. Perhaps it's because of the climate and environment, most of them are too rough and dark. I'm not discriminating against them, but since they're performing for everyone, they should at least look pleasing to the eyes. It's better to avoid those who don't look interesting at first glance." After saying this, Shui Qing made a gesture of touching her forehead. "Well, after being busy for more than an hour, we only found 3 good seedlings." After saying this, she handed a roster to Beta Persei. Due to their relationship with Yang Qindong, the people of Yangxia were more used to using hours instead of hours when talking about time. However, they only found 3 suitable people in more than an hour. This was indeed a lot of pressure for the publicity department that had to recruit 200 students. Beta Persei pretended not to care and took a look at the roster. The name of the last of the 3 recruited people, Kikij, came into his eyes. "Chichiga, that's a nice name." He still asked as if he didn't know anything about it. It had to be said that after being by Yang Qindong's side for a long time, Yang Heir had learned to do things in a roundabout way. He had also learned some methods. If it was in the past, he might have directly asked questions. "Yes." Speaking of Kikij, Shui Qing seemed to be very interested. "I don't know how this girl takes care of herself. Her skin is good and she has a good dancing foundation. She's a talent that our publicity department urgently needs. You haven't seen her, but even if she wore the most simple clothes, you can still see that she's a delicate flower." Shui Qing said unintentionally, or rather she said it as if she was showing off. When Tiger's Mane heard everything, he was even more certain that the girl he saw should be Kikij. This was because when he entered the big house, he observed that there were many girls who came and they were all dressed in colorful clothes. He thought that on such an occasion, they would wear the most beautiful clothes and leave the best first impression for others. Kikij did not wear any colorful clothes. Perhaps it was because of her personality, or perhaps that was the best she had. Unfortunately, Kikij was too happy. After knowing that she was chosen, she left in a hurry and did not even leave an address. This made Beta Persei unable to find out more even if he wanted to. Of course, with his identity, it was not impossible for him to find someone in the beginning city based on his name. However, that would be too much of a waste of manpower and material resources. Beta Persei did not want to be special. He thought that since this girl would come to work in the publicity department as long as he had the heart, would he be afraid that he would not have the opportunity to see her? Beta Persei was still thinking about the next opportunity to meet Kikij when Kikij returned home in high spirits. However, as soon as she entered the room, she saw her brother, Batu, squatting on the ground and her mother, Badama, comforting him. Batu, don't think too much. The mercenaries are doing this for your own good. Who asked you to have no brothers in the family? This is also for our family's sake. Badama said earnestly and reached out to stroke Batu's hair. She was undoubtedly a loving mother. What's going on? Kikij, who had a premonition, looked at her mother and brother and asked as she walked forward. Sister, they don't want me. They said that I'm the only son in the family. When Batu heard his sister's voice, he quickly raised his head. When he looked at Kikij, his eyes were full of grievances. If Batu's performance was not good enough and his physical fitness was not strong enough, it might still be sad, but it was also difficult for Batu to accept. However, he passed the basic physical fitness assessment and even got a good result in his equestrian performance. However, when they finally investigated his family situation and learned that he was the only son, they directly rejected him. According to the mercenary examiner, it was too dangerous for the only son to go to the battlefield. They could not use the future of a family as an excuse. Logically speaking, these words were really for the sake of these Mongolian youths. The mercenaries didn't want to end the bloodline of these youths. After all, anything could happen on the battlefield, and the enemy wouldn't take extra care of you just because you were the only child of your clan. However, the situation of Batu's family needed to be changed urgently, especially his mother's illness. He had to find a way to treat it as soon as possible. If he could not join the army, what else could he do? Not to mention that he did not earn much from doing manual labor, it was already early winter. What else could he do? Batu was a filial child. He was anxious to rely on his own efforts to change his family. In his opinion, this was what an indomitable man should do. Kikij was also shocked by this statement. Her brother woke up very early today, even earlier than her sister who had to wake up to make breakfast. His eagerness to join the army was already very obvious. She originally thought that her brother was tall and strong. He would definitely be a good seedling if he joined the army. However, she did not expect that he would be rejected with such a reason. This was really unexpected. How about little brother not join the army? I have already been chosen to join the publicity department. In the future, I will have a salary of 10 taels of silver a month. Our family situation will slowly change. The originally good news, now that it came out of Kikij's mouth, it did not seem that surprising anymore. Sister, have you been chosen? That's great. Batu, who was still squatting on the ground, was pleasantly surprised when he heard the news. However, he quickly lowered his head again. His sister could do things for the family, but he, a 7-feet-tall man, could not do anything. This seemed to reflect his incompetence. Hearing that his daughter was chosen by the publicity department, Badama was also very happy. Good, I knew my daughter was the best. There's no problem. In any case, there was still good news. Badama actually said that he wanted to borrow some food from the neighbors to celebrate. Moreover, for the first time she did not allow Kikij to interfere. In her words, her daughter's hands would be of great use in the future, so it was better not to do these manual labor. His mother went to work alone. Batu was in a bad mood. He returned to his room and covered himself with a blanket to sleep, leaving Kikij alone. However, her feelings were actually very complicated. She really wanted to help her brother. Just like the Han people, the Mongols also had the idea of valuing boys over girls. No matter how good a daughter was, she would eventually have to marry someone. Only when the man in her family had a promising future would he be able to bring real change to the family. The relationship between the two of them had been very good since they were young. As the elder sister, Kikij didn't want to see her younger brother depressed and upset. She would rather not be chosen than to see this scene happen. No, I have to help my brother. A firm voice rang out in his heart. Chichigu said that he had something to do and left the room. In her mind, she thought about what Beta Persei had said to her. If you have any problems, you can come to me. She decided to give it a try. No matter what, he was still in the Yang residence. It shouldn't be a problem for him to help her brother with this small matter. Beta Persei did not expect that while he was still thinking about Kikij in his heart, she would actually come to his door so quickly. He was still on duty by Yang Qindong's side. After reporting what he saw at the publicity office, he became a little absent-minded. With Yang Qindong's observation skills, he naturally noticed this, but he did not ask anything. He believed that if there was really something big, Beta Persei would definitely report to him. It was also at this time that the second guard captain Dao Xiao entered the room. Seeing the sixth young master sitting there reading a book, he carefully went to Beta Persei's side. Beta Persei, gee, someone is looking for you outside. It's a girl called Kikich. Chapter 755. Originally, Yang Er still looked listless. Looking at the situation, he wanted to ask who was looking for him, but when he suddenly heard Chichiji's name, he didn't even report to Yang Qindong. Instead, he rushed out of the house and disappeared without a trace. What's going on? Yang Qindong noticed Beta Persei's abnormal behavior. He did not ignore it but asked Dao Xiao, who seemed to know some inside information. Dao Xiao was not gossiping, but he had to answer the sixth young master's question. He immediately told him what happened in the morning at the entrance of the publicity office. He was very objective. He even reported what Beta Persei said to Shui Qing. Yang Qindong was smart. He immediately knew that Beta Persei had fallen in love with the girl called Kikich. Beta Persei was not young anymore, and Yang Qindong never stopped his subordinates from dating and getting married. There was even a period of time when he wanted to find a wife for Beta Persei. He did not expect that the opportunity would come to him. Since it had happened, he could not ignore it. After all, Beta Persei was someone close to him. If something happened, it would be a big deal. Go find Feng Liang. Tell him that I said it. I want to know more about Kikich, her family, and the people around her, Yang Qindong ordered Dao Xiao. Although it was a coincidence and there should not be any problems with Kikich, things were unpredictable. Without investigation, there was no right to speak. Beta Persei did not know that Kikich's matter had attracted the sixth young master's attention. He only knew that the girl in his heart had appeared, and that was enough to make him excited. After running out of the room, Beta Persei quickly calmed down. First, he tidied up his clothes and found that there was nothing wrong. Then he walked out of the Yang Mansion's gate with steady steps. The sixth young master had said that the more important the matter was, the calmer one had to be in order to make the most accurate decision. Yang Er also learned to calm down, but when he went out and saw Kikich standing there with her head lowered, he was discouraged. He realized that his heartbeat was very disappointing. No matter how hard he tried to calm down, he couldn't calm his heart down. Perhaps Beta Persei was worried that the girl already had a husband. It's you, Kikich, right? My name is Beta Persei. No matter what kind of worries he had, Beta Persei decided to get to know her first. If she was not betrothed, then his chance had come. While introducing himself, he also extended an arm that represented friendship. Unfortunately, he did not get a response from Kikich. The other party was not used to this at all. Seeing Second Yang reach out his hand to her as soon as they met, she was shocked. Her whole body involuntarily stepped back, and her eyes revealed fear. She almost shouted, "What do you want to do?" Hee hee. Seeing that his actions were a little frightening, Beta Persei smiled foolishly and retracted his hand. He touched his head and broke the awkwardness by asking, "You must have something to tell me. Speak." Beta Persei extended his hand as soon as they met, which was not considered polite at the time. It made Kikich feel that she had found the wrong person. After all, that action was a little too frivolous. However, Beta Persei expressed his goodwill and asked if she had anything to tell him. This made Kikich hesitate for a while before she bit her lip and made up her mind. Our family has encountered a little problem and we would like to ask for your help, but I don't know if you can help. Beta Persei was delighted when he heard this. This was a good opportunity to understand Kikich's family. He would know what kind of person she was as soon as he went, so how could he refuse? As for his ability, there should not be many people in the beginning city who would not give him face. Beta Persei was of course full of confidence in the things he was good at. He patted his strong chest and said, "I can still do ordinary things." Beta Persei's appearance seemed to give Kikich confidence. She really had no other choice. It seemed that among the people she knew, only Beta Persei seemed to have some status. "Well, it's about my younger brother. His name is Ba Tu." In the end, Kikich told Beta Persei about the family matters, but it was only limited to her younger brother. She did not tell him about her mother's illness and poor health. It was the first time they met, so it would be rude to tell him everything. Beta Persei listened carefully. At this time he felt that Kikich's voice was so pleasant to the ear. Even though she was a little pouting when she spoke Chinese and was not even fluent, he felt that it was nice to hear. Perhaps this was what it meant by beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Kikich finished speaking very quickly, but when she saw that Beta Persei was still listening carefully, she could not help but ask anxiously, Are you listening? Oh, I'm listening. Beta Persei quickly returned to his body and nodded. The younger brother you mentioned has good physical fitness. He's already an adult, right? But because he's the only son in the family, he can't join the army, right? Yes, that's it. Do you have any ideas? After listening, Kikij's hopeful eyes fell on Beta Persei. Beta Persei enjoyed this kind of gaze very much, but he also felt a lot of pressure. This was the time to show his ability. If he did not perform well, he was afraid that there would be no chance for what would happen next. With Beta Persei's identity, if he greeted the conscription office, the problem of Ba-Tu joining the army would definitely be solved in the most appropriate way, and even the best arrangements would be made. After all, he was one of the people around the sixth young master, so he definitely had some face. However, after following Yang Qindong for a long time, Beta Persei trusted his eyes more than his ears. He decided to take a look at Ba-Tu personally to see if he was really as tall and strong as Kikij said. Of course, no one knew if he would take this opportunity to understand Kikij's family situation. How about this, can I meet your brother? If he's really as good as you said, then I should be able to help. Beta Persei did not immediately make a promise. Instead, he wanted to understand the situation before making a decision. Kikij hesitated. She was not worried about Beta Persei's ability. After all, they were at the entrance of the Yang mansion where he came from. Would the people around the god of war and the messenger of Tingri be bad people? She was only worried about the situation at home. For some reason, she did not want Beta Persei to see the situation at home. What's wrong? Is there a problem? Seeing that Kikij did not immediately agree, Beta Persei asked. Logically speaking, since he had agreed to help, the other party should be happy and should immediately lead the way. Could it be that there was something that was hard to say? Or was it that she was already married, and if she brought another man home, others would gossip about her? No problem. Kikij bit her lips again and said. Then, as if she had made some kind of decision, she said, I'll take you to my house to see my brother. In Kikij's heart, there was nothing more important than her brother's matter. Okay, wait for me. Beta Persei's heart also settled down. Then he chuckled and turned to the sentinel standing guard at the entrance of the Yang mansion and said, Go and call out Ba Daojiang's group of brothers. Also, send someone to tell Captain Dao Xiao that I'm going out to handle some personal matters. As one of Yang Qindong's people, Beta Persei had to inform him wherever he went, even if it was not a matter of freedom. Of course, there was no need to report to Yang Qindong and disturb the sixth young master when he went out to handle some personal matters. However, someone in the mansion had to know. The sentinel was also a soldier of the guards. Seeing that it was Beta Persei who had spoken, he immediately agreed and turned to enter the mansion. Not long after, Ba Daojiang led 5 guards out of the mansion and came to Beta Persei's side. Ba Daojiang is ordered to lead the soldiers to report to Beta Persei. As soon as Ba Daojiang appeared, he saluted and said seriously. This was not Beta Persei putting on airs, but doing things according to the rules set by Yang Qindong. The rules required that no one was allowed to act alone when they went out. There had to be at least 4 to 6 people. This was also for their safety. Although the security in the first city seemed to be very good, this was a new city after all. There were many Mongolians in the city. If they were not careful, wouldn't they be asking for trouble if there were any losses? Ba Daojiang had a total of 6 people behind him. Beta Persei turned to look at Kikij and said in a gentle tone, Okay, you lead the way. Seeing that Second Yang was able to bring 6 soldiers with him just by saying a few words, and they were all from the Yang residence, Chichigu thought even more highly of Second Yang's ability. He nodded and said, All right, follow me. However, my home is a bit far from the city. I'm afraid it's a bit far. It doesn't matter. We don't have any other abilities, but we're not afraid of being tired. Beta Persei patted his chest and said. Kikij did not lie. They walked for nearly 2 hours. He did not know how a girl like her walked from her house to the Yang mansion's entrance alone. When Kikij finally stopped in front of an extremely ordinary-looking door, Beta Persei knew that they had finally arrived. He could not help but curse in his heart, It seems that I have to ride here next time. The distance is indeed a little too far. In fact, in the first city, people were not allowed to ride horses on the streets without special reasons. Firstly, it was easy to collide with people on horseback. Secondly, horses had horse dung, which would increase the difficulty of cleaning the clean streets in the city. But riding a bicycle was different. It was clean and fast. Of course, other than Beta Persei and the others, it would not be so easy for ordinary people to get a bicycle. When they finally arrived at the door of Kikij's house, Beta Persei's expression became much more solemn. He even tried to squeeze out more smiles on his face. He wanted to leave a good first impression. Chapter 756. There was no such thing as individual houses in the beginning city. They were all collectively owned, which meant that they all belonged to Yang Qindong. Everyone who came here was just renting a house. According to the rules, only those who had worked in the beginning city for more than 5 years were qualified to buy a house here. This caused the houses here to look the same from the outside. The so-called differences were only the various differences after entering the rooms. For example, the furnishings in the house, the decent items in the house, and so on. However, when Beta Persei followed Kikij into the house, he really did not see anything decent. It gave him a feeling of emptiness and then cleanliness. Cleanliness did not mean that there was nothing clean, but it meant that the house was wiped clean. From this, it could be seen that this family was very hard-working. When Kikij came back and brought some soldiers with him, Ba Dama and Ba Tu, who were cooking, were frightened. They stood up and stood there cautiously, not knowing what to do. After all, the mercenaries were usually seen patrolling the streets with a meticulous look. Suddenly coming into such close contact with them, it was more or less a little difficult for them to adapt. Mother, brother, this is Beta Persei. He is from the Yang residence. Brother Beta Persei, this is my mother, Ba Dama, and my brother, Ba Tuesday. Kikij stood between the two sides and introduced them to each other. So it's Annie and brother. Hello, my name is Beta Persei. Beta Persei was very enthusiastic and generous. But this time he did not reach out his hand, afraid that he would leave a bad impression on the other party. When she heard from her daughter that the person was from the Yang residence, the expression on Ba Dama's face immediately became very nervous. So it's a soldier from the Yang residence. Please take a seat in the house. Seeing Ba Dama's nervousness, Beta Persei chuckled again and said, Auntie, you can call me Beta Persei. You don't have to call me soldier. As he spoke, Beta Persei had already stepped into the house and saw a plate of mutton on the table. Although the portion was small, it looked crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. It seemed to be very delicious. This should be Kikij's lunch. Seeing Beta Persei staring at the mutton, Badama said with an unnatural expression, Kikij was chosen by the publicity team. Our family is preparing to celebrate for her. If you want to try it, you can try it. Batu, why don't you add another knife disc? After Batu agreed, he turned around and walked to the kitchen. However, Beta Persei reached out to stop him. Is this how you celebrate? There should be something delicious left, right? Bring it all up. Of course, Beta Persei was not craving mutton. In fact, after coming to the grasslands, he had eaten mutton the most. However, eating the same thing every day for a long time would make anyone sick of it. The reason why Beta Persei said this was because he saw that this plate of mutton should be the only dish for Kikij's celebration. When he first entered the house, he smelled some potatoes. If he guessed correctly, there should be potato cubes in the pot, which could be regarded as a staple food in the house. Wanting to see the other dishes in front of everyone put Badama in a difficult position. However, she was older after all and her skin was thicker. She shook her head and said, This is the celebratory dish we prepared for Kikij. This is the one I borrowed from the neighbor. When Kikij receives his monthly salary, he will have to return it. Since he had already said everything, there was nothing left to hide. Thus, Badama revealed everything to him. Hearing this, Beta Persei's face did not show any surprise. He just had mixed feelings in his heart. This was the life of the Mongolian people. Those Khans still wanted to fight for territory and fought every day. The lives of the people were so difficult. Who would care? This was also because he had been with Yang Qindong for a long time and learned to be compassionate. However, Beta Persei was not the sixth young master. He quickly returned to reality. First, he glanced at Kikij, then his gaze fell on the door and shouted, Badao Jiang, come in. As soon as his voice fell, the door opened. Badao Jiang, who was dressed in a military uniform, strode in. Brother Beta Persei, what can I do for you? Send someone to the nearest restaurant and get 6 dishes and some good wine. Remember, be quick. Beta Persei's voice carried an unquestionable air of command. Yes. 8 Dao Jiang Ili saluted and turned to carry out the orders. Kikij's family of 3 looked at him. In the end, Badao Ma said, No need, we're used to eating this. It's fine if we eat this normally, but today is a day to celebrate Kikij. How can we just do it casually? Just get 6 dishes to show that everything is going well. Beta Persei looked as if he had made up his mind. Then he did not dwell on this matter. Instead, his gaze fell on Ba Tuesday, I heard from your sister that your physical fitness is good, but you weren't selected because you're the only son? Batu was still upset about the fact that he didn't enlist in the army. Suddenly young heir asked him such a question which made him see hope. He nodded and said, "Yes, I passed the physical fitness test and the equestrian test. My results were good. But when it came to my family, they said that I was the only son in the family and persuaded me to leave." Speaking of this, Batu still had an aggrieved look on his face full of indignation. "Yes." Beta Persei nodded. This was the same as what Kikij said. Seeing Beta Persei nod, Batu was full of hope. He thought that since this person was from the Yang residence and could order other soldiers at will, he should have some status. As long as he was willing to help, there should be no problem. While he was still thinking about this, Beta Persei had already spoken. The people in the recruitment office are right to do this. This is also the intention of the god of war. After all, people will die in war. He is actually thinking for you. Even Beta Persei said that this was the right thing to do. Batu, who had just seen hope, could not help but lower his head again. Didn't this mean that there was no hope for him to enlist in the army? Just when Batu lowered his head and Kikij and his mother's faces were also gloomy, Beta Persei suddenly spoke again. "There are exceptions. If you really want to rely on enlisting in the army to protect the first city and want to use this to make a name for yourself, this feeling is understandable and can be satisfied. But there is one thing: people may die in war. Are you afraid of death? And auntie, if Batu dies gloriously on the battlefield, can you accept it?" Things suddenly took a turn for the better, and Kikij's family of 3 could not help but feel their eyes light up. Next, Batu spoke first. "I can accept it. People will always die in war. If I die in war, it means that my skills are not as good as others. There is nothing to regret." "Okay. What do you think, Andy?" Young couldn't help but ask. Then she turned her gaze towards Badama. As a mother who would want to see her son get into trouble? Who would be willing to see her son die? However, Badama knew her son's ambition. She thought that people would die eventually, either vigorously or without life. She nodded heavily. "Life and death are up to fate. I support my son." "Then there's no problem." Hearing such an answer, Beta Persei said as if he was making a guarantee. "There's no problem?" Kikij, who was at the side, did not understand. What did this mean? Could it mean that Batu could enlist in the army? Not only Kikij, but Badama and Batu also looked at Beta Persei with a puzzled expression. He had to add, "How about this? I'll take Batu to the recruitment office in a while. As long as he passes the previous physical fitness and equestrian assessment, then he can enter the barracks in the afternoon. But for the 1 to 3 months of recruit training, I'm afraid you won't be able to meet him. That's a closed training, so you have to be mentally prepared in this regard." "It's okay, I can bear it." As if afraid that Beta Persei would go back on his word, Batu hurriedly shouted. At this time he could not wait to go to the barracks with Beta Persei immediately. As for whether he would eat or not, it did not matter. "There's no hurry. The food will be delivered soon. We'll go after eating." Young heir chuckled. At this moment Kikij also laughed. From time to time her eyes would look at Beta Persei. Her expression was full of a different kind of feeling. Ba Daojiang was very fast. After a while he returned with 6 dishes. 4 of them were meat, 2 were vegetables and a large pot of white rice. Kikij did not know how long it had been since she had such a sumptuous lunch. With Beta Persei taking the lead, everyone ate until they were full. Then, when Kikij looked at Beta Persei, there was a trace of tenderness in her eyes. Cough, cough, cough. Suddenly Ba Dama coughed out of the blue. It was followed by a long bout of non-stop coughing until his face turned red. Only then did he slowly recover. "What's going on? Andy has caught a cold. Didn't she go to the hospital in the city?" Beta Persei noticed that neither Kikij nor Batu showed any surprise at this moment. It was as if they were used to it. He suddenly felt that something was wrong and asked with concern. "Yes, but the cost of the hospital is too high. We can't afford it." Kikij answered, but as she spoke, her voice became softer and softer. "How can this be? If you're sick, you have to see a doctor. This can't be delayed. How about this? Send Andy to the hospital immediately. I'll pay for the cost." Beta Persei knew that his opportunity to perform had come again, so he said without hesitation. Chapter 757. How can we do that? We already owe you too much. Kikij's face turned red as she spoke. At that moment she even thought of selling her body to save her mother. Why not? You and your brother are going to serve the mercenaries soon. You can return the money you earn to me in the future. Besides, you and Batu are going to join the army, so Andy will be considered a military family member. She will be taken care of in the hospital and the fees will be reduced a lot. Don't hesitate, this matter is settled. Beta Persei said in an unquestionable tone. At that moment he had undoubtedly become a pillar of support for Kikij's family. After the meal, Beta Persei first accompanied Badama's family to the hospital. When young heir appeared here, even the director was shocked. Then he found the best doctor. After seeing him, he concluded that it was only caused by the cold. There was nothing wrong with him. He just needed to stay in the hospital and take medicine to recuperate for a while. At that moment, Beta Persei asked for a room to be admitted to the hospital. Naturally, he was given the green light. Under the principle of special treatment, Badama was soon admitted to the hospital. Next, Beta Persei accompanied Batu to the recruitment office. Since he had shown up, the officers there naturally obeyed. Batu's name appeared on the recruits' roster and he was asked to arrange a place to live and receive the corresponding equipment. At this point he had done what he had promised. Kikij, who had been following beside him, also found that her mother and brother were not around. She was alone with Beta Persei. Ba Daojiang and the others naturally kept a certain distance from the two of them. Seeing that there was no one around, Kikij's face turned even redder. Thank you for everything you've done for our family. Hey, it's nothing. Since you think so highly of the mercenaries, it's only right that we do something for you. Beta Persei said casually. But after saying this, his face turned a little red. He seemed to have thought of something but did not dare to say it out loud. What happened to you? Looking at Beta Persei's awkward appearance, Kikij asked curiously. He did not look as heroic as he did in the hospital and the recruitment office just now. Beta Persei, who was questioned by Kikij, blushed again, but in the end he gritted his teeth and said as if he had made up his mind, can I visit you at the publicity office in the future? Kikij didn't expect it to be this question. For a moment her face turned red like a ripe apple. If she still did not know what Beta Persei was thinking, she would be too stupid. Kikij did not answer. Beta Persei became a little anxious. I just want to see you. I won't disturb your work. I'll just look at you from afar, okay? Yes. After waiting for a long time, Kikij finally gave a response. Although it was only one word, it carried a lot of signals. It also caused young heir to be beaming with joy. He was extremely excited. When it was time for dinner, Beta Persei returned to the young residence in high spirits, but found that young Qindong had not eaten yet and was waiting for him. He hurried over. Young master, it's late. You should have dinner. I'm waiting for you. Let's eat together. Young Qindong's voice was flat, but when he said that, Beta Persei felt that he had to obey. As Yang Xie continued to expand, although young Qindong was only a young man in his 20s, the aura of a superior was very strong. It was no exaggeration to say that he already had the aura of a superior without being angry. Even in the face of the beaming emperor, he would not be afraid. The meal was served. It was only 4 dishes and 1 soup. Beta Persei accompanied Yang Qindong for dinner. After the things were taken away, Yang Qindong looked at Beta Persei. Is there anything you want to say to me? Knowing that nothing could escape the 6th young master's eyes, Beta Persei did not intend to hide anything. He told him everything that happened today from beginning to end. When he finished, he said shyly, Young master, I like Kikij. I want to take her as my concubine. When he said that he wanted to take her as his concubine, Yang Qindong's originally calm expression showed a trace of appreciation. He had previously made a rule that the cold blade warriors and above could only marry Han women. No matter how good other women were, they could only be taken as concubines. For Beta Persei to say such words, it was obvious that he was following this rule. After knowing that Beta Persei had a sense of propriety, Yang Qindong had no intention of obstructing him. Instead, he nodded and said, Okay, you can do as you see fit. How about this? Tell me what you've seen and learned from Kikij's family. After knowing that Yang Qindong would not obstruct him and Kikij, Beta Persei also became energetic. He immediately said in detail, Young master, the Mongolian people are too poor. Not only do they not have enough to eat, but they also have no money to treat their illness. There should be many people like this in the beginning city. That's right, the people are too poor. How about this? Pass down the order that all military families will have their rent reduced by half. In the future they will be able to enjoy a 20% discount when buying rice and meat, and a 50% discount when treating illnesses. But you have to be careful that only one wife and one concubine of a mercenary warrior can enjoy this treatment. Those who marry several at once can forget about it. Yang Qindong could help others, but the premise was that others approved of him. If anyone who entered the beginning city could receive such treatment, not only would they need a lot of money as subsidies, but it would also be easy for others to take advantage of the loopholes. Being a mercenary was equivalent to facing life and death at any time. Such a sacrifice was worth a certain amount of return. On the contrary, those who just wanted to find a safe place to live and did not want to pay any price could forget about it. He was not a god who could guarantee that everyone would live a good life. Even if he was a savior, he would only save those who needed to be saved and those who worked hard and contributed. Hearing Yang Qindong's actions, Beta Persei solemnly saluted Yang Qindong. This was his gratitude to the sixth young master on behalf of the mercenary families. The next morning, Yang Qindong's new order was spread to the entire city. Instantly, the entire city was in an uproar. Regardless of whether it was those who signed up to join the army or those who wanted to join the publicity department, there were more and more people. After all, as a military family, they had such generous conditions, so it was impossible for them not to join the army even if they wanted to. This kind of spontaneous behavior quickly allowed the publicity department to find 200 good seedlings, filling up the 6,000 slots of the recruitment office. Even so, who knew how many people were still racking their brains to join the ranks of the military? However, rules were rules. In the end, Yumian stood up and said that if they wanted to join the army, they would have a chance in the future and would not accept them for the time being. If anyone gathered together and disturbed the order in the city, they would be arrested and disqualified from joining the army in the future. In special times, special methods were needed to govern the city. The beginning city became quiet again and was gradually shrouded by a heavy snow. Just as it seemed calm and many forces on the grassland were hiding for the winter, two pieces of news came from the Security Bureau. The director of the Security Bureau of the beginning city, Feng Liang, appeared in the Yang residence. Sitting in a warm room with a stove wall, Yang Qindong carefully read the two pieces of news and put them aside. "Tell me, how do you feel?" Knowing that the sixth young master was testing him, Feng Liang pondered for a moment, organized his words and raised his head. "Sixth young master, in this subordinate's opinion, these two matters should have nothing to do with each other. It's good that Baiming has developed a new type of cannon, but the results have just come out. However, Zhang Quan and the others have been gone for some time. Judging from the time, they should not have received this news when they set off, so there is no connection, let alone any threat. I can only say that everything is just a coincidence." The two things that Feng Liang reported were that Baiming had developed a new type of cannon and that the eunuch guarding the Datong residence, Zhang Quan, was already 20 miles away and would soon enter the beginning city. Ever since Yang Qindong defeated Yeshen of the Wara with the name of the god of war, Baiming's imperial court saw the importance of firearms. They first tried their best to get a Type 81 gun and began to develop an imitation. However, without any guidance they could only rely on the imitation and the progress was very slow. At least until now they had not been able to create it. On the other hand, cannons were different. They knew that only an explosion could cause the greatest lethality after the cannon was fired, so they just had to find a way to do it. Originally, Baiming had an artillery battalion, but the cannonballs fired by the artillery battalion were only large iron balls. Wherever they hit, they would leave a hole. The lethality of the cannonballs was too small, and only those standing in the front of the cannonballs would be threatened. However, after all, they had a certain foundation. After understanding the principle and investing a lot of manpower and energy, they finally received news that a new type of cannon had been developed. This news was sent by Yang Guang, who was in charge of the artillery battalion. During the Battle of the Capital, Yang Guang was Yang Qindong's subordinate. Later on they became friends during the battle. He also listened to Yang Qindong's arrangements and went to the artillery battalion. After more than 3 years this move finally played its role and news came. The news came, but it was not completely clear what the new cannon looked like. This was also why Yang Qindong was somewhat distressed. It was also at this time that another piece of news came. Baiming's Datong guard eunuch Zhang Quan was ordered by the emperor to come to Shi City and have a good talk with Yang Qindong. In summary, these two matters seemed to be related. It seemed that Baiming had a new type of cannon and had enough confidence, so they decided to have a good talk with this loyal duke. However, only Yang Qindong himself knew that they weren't close to each other. It was just a coincidence. Chapter 758. We still need to send someone to inquire about the new cannon. What exactly is it like? What are its functions and power? We have to find a way to find out. Although it's difficult, we'll try our best to do it. Yang Chendong gave the Security Bureau a direction for the first piece of news. Next, he talked about the second piece of news. When Zhang Quan arrives, arrange for Yu Mian to meet with them and discuss with them. Let's see if there are any regulations to report to me. It was true that Yu Mian was Yu Qian's son, but at that time, Yu Qian had disappeared. Bai Ming did not care about it. As his son, Yu Mian naturally did not need to work for Bai Ming. Based on this point, even Zhang Quan could not say anything. If he insisted on using this matter as an excuse, it could only be said that this person's IQ was too low. Yang Chendong had just made arrangements. That night, 1,000 Bai Ming guards arrived at the foot of the first city. They had already sent someone to report. When Zhang Quan and Captain Su Dei arrived at the foot of the city with the army, the city gate was already wide open. Many soldiers wearing large cotton-padded clothes with torches lined up on both sides of the road. Looking at their appearance, they were all in high spirits. When they looked at the Bai Ming army, their eyes lit up. They were like tigers that could open their bloody mouths at any time and eat people. Zhang Quan was not tall and his eyes were not big, but they were very spirited. They were like a pair of mouse eyes that kept flickering. It was obvious that this person was still somewhat clever. Captain Su, this is the territory of the Duke of Loyalty. You must instruct your soldiers not to cause trouble. Otherwise no one can protect you. Looking at the formation at the city gate, Zhang Quan carefully said to Su Dei. At this moment he was frightened by the situation. His legs were trembling and trembling. A eunuch was a eunuch after all. He relied on pleasing the emperor to obtain power. He had never been through the battlefield. How could he not be afraid in the face of the murderous aura of the mercenaries? This is the original Alikomaki? I only heard that it was pitifully small, but it doesn't look like it. Zhang Quan was extremely flustered. Firstly, the appearance of the mercenaries had frightened him. Secondly, he was shocked by the majestic city in front of him. At this moment, Su Dei was looking at the mercenaries standing outside the city. As a Qianhu, especially a Qianhu at the forefront of the front line, he was more professional than ordinary soldiers. Because of this, he could feel the valiant and murderous aura of the mercenaries. Hearing Zhang Quan's words, Su Dei nodded and said, "This place used to be pitifully small and abandoned for a long time. It seems like the loyal duke really put in a lot of effort here." Su Dei was different from other people. He started off as a corporal and worked his way up bit by bit. In the past, he had been to some places around the Great Ming Dynasty. Later, he was chosen by Commander Sun Hong and was promoted step by step to the position of Qianhu Guard. It was precisely because he had been to Arakumaki before that he was even more surprised than Zhang Quan when he suddenly saw the magnificent first city. If it weren't for the fact that the aura of these mercenaries was even more amazing, his attention would have been diverted to the city's buildings. The city gate opened and there were still mercenaries walking out. After about half a cup of tea's time, when everything in sight was lit up by torches, a general wearing a black cloak rode out and stopped 3 meters in front of Zhang Quan and Su Dei. The warhorse was stopped by the reins, but the general didn't get off the horse, nor did he report his name. He just stared at Zhang Quan and Su Dei with a scrutinizing gaze. After a long time, he slowly spat out 3 words, "Enter the city." Suddenly being stared at, Zhang Quan felt a chill run down his spine. Even Su Dei, who was at the side, was tense all the time. He just had a feeling that if something really happened, even if he drew his sword, he wouldn't be the other party's opponent. The person who came could give him a great sense of oppression. After saying these 3 words, the general in the black cloak turned and left. He didn't even look at Zhang Quan and Su Dei. It was as if the other party was an insignificant character who didn't deserve his attention at all. With someone leading the way, although he didn't appear to be a very good friend, Zhang Quan and Su Dei had nowhere to go. At this time, they could only follow the other party's footsteps and walk into the first city. The city was also dark. After all, it was late. Under the guidance of the general in the black cloak, they turned left and right and came to the front of an inn. There were already people waiting here to arrange their food, clothing, and accommodation. The area of the inn was not small, and each room was also very big. However, there were more than 1,000 Ming soldiers. When these people swarmed in, it was still a little crowded. However, from the beginning to the end, no one stood out to say anything strange. It was probably because they also knew that this was not their territory and talking nonsense was likely to bring about an unexpected disaster. These more than 1,000 people stayed in the designated inn. Until they went to bed, no one came to see them or sent anyone with status to receive them. Only the waiters in the inn were busy. There were just a few waiters. What could they find out from their mouths? At this time, Zhang Quan couldn't help but feel a little regretful. He didn't expect the people here in the first city to be so strong. It seemed that this trip to seek cooperation wouldn't be too smooth. If he had known this, he might not have chosen to come. Yang Qindong naturally couldn't guess what Zhang Quan was thinking. He heard Tiger's Mane report all kinds of things about Zhang Quan and the others in the Yang residence. He couldn't help but smile. Who arranged for Yi La to go out of the city to welcome them? It seemed that the general in the black cloak was the commander of the Nuzan cavalry regiment, Yi La. No wonder the murderous aura was so strong that even Su Dei was scared. Young master, this is the joint idea of City Lord Yumian and I. We thought that the other party would come from afar, so we have to show them our strength first. Not understanding Yang Qindong's meaning, Tiger's Mane said tentatively. The sixth young master had previously said that he and Yumian would be in charge of the welcoming, but he hadn't expressed any attitude. Therefore, sending Yi La was also the idea of the two of them in order to intimidate the opponent. If they didn't strike the opponent's morale, they were afraid that some things wouldn't be easy to do next. Well, Yi La's murderous aura is strong. It should scare them so much that they won't be able to sleep well tonight. Yang Qindong still had a smile on his face. Obviously, he wasn't angry about Tiger's Mane and Yumian's choice. But in the end he still said, I'm afraid that just being a deterrent is not enough. How about this? Let them see the prosperity of the city tomorrow. One by one, is the way of civil and martial arts. Finally there was a clear instruction. Tiger's Mane nodded repeatedly and said, Yes, young master. I'll make the arrangements now. That night, whether it was Zhang Quan or Su Dei, they didn't sleep well. Looking at the situation in the beginning city, they really couldn't guarantee that their heads wouldn't be cut off when they fell asleep. As it turned out, this worry was unnecessary. The next morning they opened their eyes without any problems. At this time the inn was extremely lively. The food had already been prepared and served in front of them. There were 4 dishes and 1 soup, and it was a standard that was sufficient. Not only did Zhang Quan and Su Dei, but even the beaming soldiers below exclaim in surprise. What time is this? Where is this place? It was cold outside and this was an isolated city. It should be extremely difficult to transport supplies here. However, the food was still so good. Not only were there meat dishes like mutton and pork, but there were also vegetarian dishes like chives, spinach, and celery. The green color on the plate was shocking. Behind the Dadong prefecture was the land of beaming. However, even in such a place, vegetables could only be seen for a few months in a year. In this season, most of the vegetables were potatoes, radishes, and cabbage. How could they eat such green food? This can't be the standard of food every day, right? Looking at the dishes on the table, Zhang Quan was surprised. Su Dei was also shocked by the reality in front of him. A voice sounded in his mind. This standard of food can't be continued. It's probably because I've just arrived and they're treating me well. Yes, that must be it. This breakfast was no less than the one that greeted them last night. It gave Zhang Quan, Su Dei, and the others a shock. Not long after breakfast, someone came to deliver a message saying that City Lord Yumian was dealing with government affairs and did not have time to see them. He asked Zhang Quan and the others to walk around the city. But at the same time he also made a request, and that was to not invite too many people on this trip, let alone gather together. Otherwise, if something went wrong, both sides would lose face. After sending away the messenger, Zhang Quan muttered to himself for a moment before looking at Su Dei and saying, "Thousand Commander Su, since they're letting us look around without any defenses, we'll do as they wish. Let's arrange for the soldiers below to be led by a sergeant to walk around the city. At night they'll report to us what they see. Remember to remind them not to make trouble out of nothing. Otherwise no one can protect them." When he said the last sentence, Zhang Quan's expression was much more serious. When Su Dei heard this, he nodded and went to make arrangements. Hundreds of small groups led by the Ming army squad leaders left the inn and started to move through the city according to the directions they had divided. Zhang Quan and Su Dei didn't stay idle either. They also brought a few attendants to the main street of the first city. They went to the commercial street that the innkeeper had mentioned. The commercial street was something that Yang Qindong must build in every city that belonged to him. By gathering all the businesses in one place, not only could it be better managed, but it could also attract people's attention. Whether it was merchants or ordinary people, they could buy things better. Chapter 759. Based on agriculture, industry, commerce, and light industry. This was the way Yang Qindong chose to develop the economy. Vast land and abundant resources were naturally a characteristic of the Central Plains. However, don't forget that there was a large population behind it. If one wanted to support so many people, just collecting taxes from the land would not solve the fundamental problem. On the contrary, it would increase the burden of the people. Therefore, from the beginning, Yang Qindong only collected a small amount of land tax symbolically. Instead, he focused on commercial development. Merchants were engaged in trade. They played the game of buying at a low price and selling at a high price. Relatively speaking, they were considered as mental workers. Such people not only contributed less but they also earned more. Compared to the farmers who faced the yellow soil with their backs facing the sky, the investment and harvest of both sides were completely not proportional. This ratio may not be seen in a short period of time. However, as time passed, the contradictions would inevitably begin to deepen. Once the gap between the rich and the poor was widened, all kinds of problems would emerge one after another. Facts also proved that when every dynasty was first established, the social order was very good. However, as it continued to develop, there were more and more unfair things. In the end, society became more and more chaotic until one day, when it could no longer be suppressed, it was replaced by a new dynasty. In order to avoid income inequality and too big of a gap, Yang Qindong adopted a heavy tax on businesses and a small land tax on farmers. Although this could not completely avoid the existence of the gap, at least it was controlled to a relatively acceptable level. Only by walking on two legs could society develop normally and continuously improve. Naturally, while imposing heavy taxes, Yang Qindong also gave a certain amount of respect to businesses. Just like in terms of social status, they were constantly being raised. This was contrary to the national policy of the Great Ming Dynasty. In the Great Ming Dynasty, the status of merchants was so low that it was even lower than the ordinary people. In the eyes of others, they were people who reaped without sowing. They were unscrupulous people who talked about money and were disgraced by others. However, in the territory controlled by Yang Xie, merchants were quite respected because they paid a heavy tax to society. This was equivalent to making a great contribution. With the rise in status, more and more businessmen were willing to come to Yang Xie's territory to develop their businesses. As a matter of fact, they earned quite a bit. After all, the goods produced by Crimson City were so novel, high quality, and few in number. It could be said that the demand exceeded the supply. It could be said that in the environment at that time, as long as one had the means to obtain the goods produced in Crimson City, one would not have to worry about selling them. The only difference was how high the price of the goods could be. If it had to be summed up in 8 words, it would be that there was no highest, only higher. Business was so profitable that it had become an important cornerstone of Yang Xie's development. Even so, how could Yang Qindong let go of such a good opportunity so easily? At the beginning of the construction of the first city, he had planned out a commercial street. He waited for the cement and steel bars to arrive from the Crimson City by sea to begin construction. Then, a large number of goods began to fill this street, causing it to quickly become prosperous and lively. This was exactly what Zhang Quan and Su Dei saw. They were surprised to find that even though it was snowing heavily outside, it was still very cold. But in the commercial street, it was indeed a bustling scene. People were squeezing and huddling together. From afar, it was as bustling as the center of the capital. If there had to be a difference, it would be that the clothes of the people here were very different from those in the capital of Baiming. Here they could see merchants wearing all kinds of strange clothes. Most of them were Mongolian merchants, and there might be merchants from further regions and countries. But what surprised Zhang Quan was that he also saw merchants from the Great Ming Dynasty here. Why would merchants from the Great Ming Dynasty appear in the grassland? Could it be that they had secretly joined the Mongolian tribe? With such doubts, Zhang Quan personally walked up to a merchant who was wearing the same clothes as the people of the Great Ming Dynasty. They seemed to be chatting, but at the same time they seemed to be asking something. The merchant did not know Zhang Quan's true identity. He only felt that this person gave him a feminine feeling. But the other party spoke the language of the Great Ming Dynasty, and this could not be fake. Moreover, the other party's clothes were the same as his. Since they were both from the Great Ming Dynasty, the merchant had a natural sense of closeness. Under Zhang Quan's intention, the two sides quickly chatted, and the conversation was very congenial. After nearly half an hour, Zhang Quan returned to Su Dei's side, but his expression was somewhat ugly. "Eunuch Zhang, what's going on? Why is there a merchant from the Great Ming Dynasty here?" Su Dei had been curious for a long time and finally had the opportunity to ask. "He is indeed a merchant from the Great Ming Dynasty, and he is from our Baiming. Zhang Quan's status was naturally higher than Su Dei's, but considering that he still needed the other party to ensure his safety this time, he did not hide anything. He did not join the Mongolian tribe, nor did he join the Duke of Zhongdan. He is buying goods here because he wants to sell them back to our Baiming. Buying goods from the grassland and selling them back to Baiming? This can take more than 20 days? Hearing this answer, Su Dei was also shocked and said with a puzzled expression. But our Baiming no longer has any goods. Or rather, we have goods, but they are controlled by those aristocratic families and important ministers in the imperial court. Small merchants like this have no share at all. They also heard about what happened in the beginning city, and they also heard that as long as they have money they can get the goods here. Moreover, as real Han people they can get a 5% discount when they get the goods. Driven by benefits they will come even if they are far away. Zhang Quan said this expressionlessly, but in fact his heart was bleeding. Speaking of which, Zhang Quan was able to become the eunuch guarding the Datong prefecture, and he also had a backer in the palace. Even his name was in the heart of the Daizongzhu Qiyu, and he could be considered to be in the privileged class. However, he was also in the privileged class and he still had to be divided into factions. He was very pessimistic about some of the influential people in the capital. Some people only relied on the power in their hands to do some things that took advantage of others. Once there was a problem they might not have the ability to solve the problem. Even so, these people who did not have much ability and only knew how to play tricks had a prosperous career. Some of them even received the favor of the emperor, which made Zhang Quan even more furious. With this understanding and now hearing this merchant's words, it was no wonder that his expression became very bad. Zhang Quan saw something deeper, which was the decay and decline of the great Ming dynasty. Although it was a small matter, it did give him a different feeling. Here all he saw was prosperity, youthfulness and hope. Su Dei was only a Qinhu. Perhaps he could not think of so many things, but he also knew that in the long run, the influence of the beginning city would grow bigger and bigger. One day it would have the power to replace the great Ming dynasty. While the two of them were still lamenting in their hearts, a mercenary soldier in military green suddenly came. "My lords, our city lord invites you." Was he finally going to see the city lord? Zhang Quan nodded to Su Dei and then said, "Please lead the way." This journey was very far and they were 5 miles away from the city. Fortunately, horses had been prepared here, and the road had been completely cleared to ensure that they could travel unimpeded. Even so, after driving for nearly half an hour, they arrived at their destination. They came to a vegetable greenhouse area covered with plastic films. The soldier who led the way took out a special token that emitted a silver light from his body. No one stopped them all the way. When they finally arrived in front of a large shed area, he got off his horse, pointed to a large shed area and said, "My lords, our city lord is inside. Please." Zhang Quan and Su Dei got off their horses and did not bring any entourage. In fact, not everyone could enter this shed. The two of them followed the soldier into the shed, and the first feeling they had was warmth. Compared to the cold weather outside, not only was the air here fresher, but the climate was also very pleasant, giving people the feeling that the 4 seasons were like spring. What greeted their eyes was not a white expanse, but was completely replaced by green. At this moment, Yu Mian, who was in front of a cucumber rack, turned his head with a smile on his face. He greeted them warmly, "Eunuch Zhang Qinhu Su, you're here." Before they came, they knew that the city lord of the beginning city was called Yu Mian. He was the eldest son of Yu Qin, the assistant minister of the Ministry of War. For this matter, the embroidered uniform guards and the East faction guards had also made a report to the imperial court. The general idea was that they suspected that Yu Qian's disappearance had a lot to do with the mercenaries. However, everything was just a guess. Without any evidence, this matter was still unknown in the end. Now that he finally saw Yu Mian, the first thing Zhang Quan said was, "How is City Lord Yu? But I wonder if Assistant Minister Yu is doing well?" In the face of this obvious test, Yu Mian chuckled and replied politely, "My father is doing well. Thank you for your concern, Eunuch Zhang. Alright, it's your first time here. How do you feel about our shed area?" He did not say much about Yu Qian's matter. This was also the result of Yu Mian asking Yang Qindong for advice. He knew that since Baiming had sent people here this time, they would definitely be interested in his identity. Naturally, they would not be able to avoid his father. When he asked about Yang Qindong, the answer he received was, half hidden, half revealed. After fully understanding this sentence, Yu Mian knew that even if he wanted to say that his father was still alive, he could not tell them what he had done. Thus he came up with this answer. Yu Mian took the initiative to change the topic, and Zhang Quan sighed in his heart. He knew that this question would end here. Not to mention whether it would cause trouble for him if he asked, he was afraid that the other party would not answer him even if he asked. Chapter 760. Fortunately, Zhang Quan was a smart person. He knew what could be said more and what could not be said at all. Therefore he went along with the flow and said that the greenhouse was very good. It was really a cheerful thing to be able to see these fresh vegetables in the cold winter. After a round of praises, Zhang Quan asked casually, "City Lord Yu, may I know how much space these greenhouses will take up?" "Not much, only 2,000 mu." Yu Mian stroked his beard that had not grown long ago and sighed. To be honest, 2,000 mu was not considered small. This was even because of Yang Qindong's suggestion. When he first heard that they were going to grow vegetables in winter, Yu Mian only thought of 100 mu. That way, even if there were any accidents, there would not be any problems. In the end, it was Yang Qindong who spoke. Considering that the shed tubes and plastic films transported from Qian City could only make 2,000 mu, he decided on this number. Now it seemed that they had planted too little. If they had known that there would be such a good result, they would not have found it too much even if they doubled it. Just like now, these vegetables had matured. Whether it was transported to the military camp or sold in the market, they were all very popular items. The high price had already allowed them to recover their initial investment. If they sold all of them, just this alone would bring a lot of benefits and income to the first city. Especially when Yang Qindong made a move again and came up with such a good thing like a vacuum bag. Once the vegetables were placed in it, it could guarantee that the quality of the vegetables would not be damaged for a certain period of time. This could allow them to be transported to further places. Of course, after being equipped with a vacuum bag, the price of the vegetables was not ordinary. Often, only the leaders of some nearby Mongolian tribes could afford to eat them. However, at that time, this was already considered a miracle. After all, although the vacuum bag was not valuable, it was indeed something that no one else could produce except for the factories in Qian City. When Zhang Quan heard that one of them was 2,000 mu, he could not help but sigh. The Duke of Loyal and Bold is really generous. Haha, come on. Since we're here, I'll show you around. Then you'll personally pick the ripe vegetables. We'll choose to have lunch here. Yu Mian seemed to be in a good mood and greeted them warmly. Zhang Quan and Su Dei each had a basket of vegetables in their hands. Although the two of them didn't have high positions, they hadn't personally picked vegetables for a long time. It was a fresh experience for them, and the greenhouse was filled with cheers and laughter. At noon, the vegetables they picked were placed on the table. With the chef's help, some pork was added. In the end, the three of them ate until they were full. During the meal, the guests and the host enjoyed themselves to the fullest, but after the meal the atmosphere quickly cooled down. Because they all knew that it was time for negotiation, and it was time for them to state their conditions. There was a war of words going on in the tent area. In the Yang mansion in the beginning city, Yang Qindong was standing in front of the sand table and looking at it carefully. He had been standing here since lunch, and it had been nearly an hour since he finished his lunch. What is the sixth young master doing? Qiu Vi, the captain of the first guard on duty, finally couldn't help but ask when he saw Yang Qindong standing there for a long time without moving. To become a member of the guard, loyalty was essential, not to mention physical fitness, but the most important thing was that they had to keep their mouths shut. Often by the sixth young master's side, it was inevitable that they would come into contact with some confidential matters. They had to know what could be said and what could not be said. Even the ordinary members knew about this, not to mention Chou Wu, who was the captain. However, he still asked. It was probably because there was only young heir in front of him. Moreover, he was indeed curious about this matter. I don't know. Beta Persei shook his head. Obviously, he couldn't see what the young master was doing. However, his intuition told him that the young master must have thought of something again. Perhaps something big would happen soon. Beta Persei was indeed someone who had been by Yang Qindong's side for many years. This time he guessed correctly. After some time, Yang Qindong finally moved his body and said to Beta Persei, "Go and call Su Yunxing over." Su Yunxing, the commander of the reconnaissance battalion. Although his rank was not very high, he was someone whom Yang Qindong trusted very much. After being found by the guards, he immediately rushed to the Yang mansion and came to the hall. Take a good look at this place. I want to know the details of his situation. Go and do it. Yang Qindong pointed to a place called Talu City on the sand table and ordered Su Yunxing. Su Yunxing left. Since it was an order from the sixth young master, he naturally didn't dare to be careless. He immediately sent the most elite force of the reconnaissance battalion to investigate Talu City. Not long after he left the Yang mansion, City Lord Yumian rushed over to report on his work. Sixth young master, we had a preliminary meeting, but the results weren't very satisfactory. Well, since it's a negotiation, naturally there won't be a result so soon. It's just that we can't wait any longer. How about this? Go and find them again tomorrow and tell them that we'll only give them 3 days. If they can't reach an agreement, then they can go back to where they came from. Yang Qindong spoke as if he had seen through everything. 3 days? Hearing this answer, Yumian was stunned. This time requirement was a bit too tight. Of course, he was more worried that with only 3 days, it would be difficult to reach an agreement. Yang Qindong seemed to see through his worries and chuckled. Don't worry, go and talk. They should have a change tonight. In the inn, it was already dark. All the Biming soldiers began to return to their teams. Then all kinds of reports were continuously reported. The Biming soldiers were not like the cold front warriors. All of them were capable in both civil and military matters. Many of them were illiterate. The so-called reports were mostly verbal reports. Zhang Quan and Su Dei listened to them talk about what they had seen in the city in the largest room in the inn. However, after only meeting a dozen Descartes, Zhang Quan waved his hand in annoyance. All right, tell them that there's no need to report anymore. I think they've seen the same thing. Zhang Quan was annoyed because all the Biming soldiers who came to report were talking about the benefits of the beginning city. For example, the prosperity of this place. For example, the treatment of the soldiers here was good, the food was good, and the equipment was complete. For example, the people here were full of vitality. The people here didn't scold the army and only praised them. According to what these soldiers said, the beginning city was close to becoming a perfect city. Those who could live in this city, whether it was the soldiers or the people, were the happiest people in the world. In that case, what was the Dadong mansion? What was the Biming mansion? What was the Biming capital? It was no wonder that Zhang Quan was so angry that he sent all of them away. Although he had long seen that the beginning city was extraordinary, now that everyone said this, it was still a little beyond his expectations. He was even wondering if it was right to let them out during the day. If this continued, the morale of the army would be affected. Eunuch Zhang, I think it's better to let them stay in the inn tomorrow. Su Dei also saw the hidden danger and carefully reminded him. I think it's okay. Zhang Quan glanced at Su Dei. He knew that the other party had the same worries and concerns as him, so he nodded. If this went on, he was really worried that the soldiers he brought would fall in love with this place and become deserters. If that happened, it would really be a huge loss of face. At this moment, Zhang Quan finally knew why the mercenaries allowed him to bring all the soldiers into the city instead of arranging a residence for them outside the city. As a result, no one stopped these soldiers from watching the show in the city. He thought about how he whimsically released all the soldiers in order to find out where the loopholes in the city were. He even had the opportunity to let them come into contact with the mercenaries and see if he could persuade them to work for him. But now his soldiers had almost rebelled. Now that he thought about it, he had really shot himself in the foot. The beginning city had this kind of attraction. The more you knew, the easier it was to be roped in by them. In view of this, Zhang Quan and Su Dei came to the same conclusion. Tomorrow they would imprison the soldiers and not allow them to walk on the streets freely. Early the next morning, the order was issued and immediately caused many soldiers to be unhappy. Many of them had heard yesterday that the mercenaries' publicity team would have a program today, and it was said that it would be very interesting. This was very tempting for the Biming soldiers who had been guarding the border. Among them, Nie Jingyi was the one who shouted the loudest. Nie Jingyi was 25 years old. He was only 3 years older than Yang Qindong, but he was already a centurion. Like many soldiers guarding the border, Nie Jingyi was born in a military family. This meant that he was destined to only be a soldier in his life. He had no other choice. Fortunately, although he was born in the same family, he seemed to like to join the army. He was the king of children since he was young. When he grew up, he also had a burly figure. After joining the army, he did not make it in time for the Battle of Tumu Fort. However, when Yes Hen led the Walla soldiers into the Hetao area and even wanted to invade Datong, he did participate in the battle. In that battle, he killed 4 enemies and captured 1 alive. He was forcefully promoted from the position of a squad leader to a centurion. It was precisely because of his military exploits that he had obtained everything he had that he was highly respected among the soldiers. At least in the centurion he led, everyone was willing to listen to him. Yesterday, he also heard from the people in the city that the publicity team would perform a program tomorrow. He also heard from the people that the actors in the publicity team were all young and beautiful. They had good figures and the performance was also very good. As the saying went, which young girl did not yearn for love and which man did not fall in love with women? Chapter 761. After all, Nie Jingyi was a young man of 25 years old. He was quite handsome, especially his head. Girls would often blush when they saw his body. However, he was still single. Speaking of which, the border army at that time wasn't that poor. In addition, the imperial court also had to consider the continuation of the army's household. For this reason, they were very concerned about the marriage of the soldiers. When a young lad reached that age, as long as he wanted to, he still had the ability to marry a woman. Nie Jingyi could only blame himself for being too good. He had always wanted to find a good-looking, kind-hearted, and good lady. There were ladies in the Datong prefecture, but young and beautiful ones were rare. Even if there were, they might not be interested in Nie Jingyi's family background. As time passed, the days passed. When he was 25 years old, he was still unmarried. How could he not be moved when he found out that there was going to be a performance by such a young man? However, the fact that he could become a centurion proved that he wasn't an ordinary soldier. He was a scheming person. When he heard Zhang Quan and Su Dei announce that they weren't allowed to leave the inn today, he didn't react strongly. Instead, he remained silent, giving people the impression that he was very supportive of this decision. You guys be careful. Watch those who are jumping around. I will deal with them when I return tonight. After receiving news from the city lord's mansion that the peace talks would continue today, Su Dei instructed his centurions before leaving the inn. Nie Jingyi was one of them. The centurions naturally nodded in response to the Kiliarka's orders. After the two of them left, most of the centurions returned to their rooms to sleep. Only 2 centurions were left on duty. Coincidentally, Nie Jingyi was one of them. Nie Jingyi's heart felt like it was on fire. He didn't know why, but he wanted to see what the performance was all about. With this thought in mind, he began to rack his brain, wondering if he should find an opportunity to take a short break. However, when his gaze fell on the entrance of the inn, he realized that there was a squad leader leading a group of 10 people guarding the entrance. He immediately dismissed the idea of forcing his way out. It wasn't that Nie Jingyi didn't have the courage to fight 1 against 10. On the contrary, these ordinary Baiming soldiers were nothing in his eyes. However, he had to consider that once he made a move, he would immediately alert the other centurions. If that happened, no matter how powerful he would not be a match for dozens of centurions. If it were someone else, they might have given up on such an idea. Nie Jingyi was different. Ever since he was a child, he had always been a righteous person. Once he decided on something, he would definitely do it. In the end, he came up with an idea. I can't rush out alone, but what if there are many people? If everyone rushed out together, no one would be able to stop them. The most important thing was that once everyone rushed out, even if Su Dei knew about it later, he wouldn't blame himself. After all, the law couldn't punish the masses. With an idea in mind, Nie Jingyi went to the room of the soldiers who were shouting the loudest with the excuse of patrolling. After that, he gave a speech of generosity. The gist of it was that if they didn't grab hold of some things now, they might not have any hope in their entire lives. Since that was the case, they had to do it even if they had to be scolded behind their backs. Everyone originally had this idea. Now that Nie Jingyi brought it up, they were all overjoyed. After that, he went to the centurion under his control and had a heart-to-heart talk with the soldiers below. After an hour, a small riot began. Caught off guard, the guards who were just putting on a show were pushed to the ground. In an instant, about 300 people walked out of the inn. These people were relatively more courageous or had made up their minds to watch the show. In any case, Nie Jingyi had said that the law couldn't punish the masses. When 30% of the people suddenly ran out, the other centurions were frightened. They hurriedly rushed to the city lord's residence to report to Zhang Quan and Su Dei. In the city lord's residence, Yu Mian had already expressed Yang Qindong's intentions. The negotiations would only last for 3 days. If there were no results, then the people from Baiming would have to leave. Zhang Quan and Su Dei had nothing to say about Yu Mian's domineering aura. This time they had taken the initiative to rush over to negotiate. Strictly speaking, they were seeking benefits. Now that they were not welcomed, how could they be angry? Since ancient times, it had always been the strong who had the right to speak. With only 3 days left, Zhang Quan did not dare to be careless. He seized every moment to negotiate with Yu Mian. He had already expressed his intention to give in. He had forgotten that just yesterday he had proposed to allow Baiming's army to be stationed in the first city. He had the intention of requisitioning this place and making it the front line of Baiming. This request was also discussed by Zhang Quan and Sun Hong before they came. It was also the best goal that they hoped to achieve. However, it was a pity that Yu Mian directly rejected it. He only replied with 3 words, impossible. Yu Mian did not show the slightest sign of weakness. On the contrary, he became the dominant party. He said that the mercenaries occupied the first city and had already dealt a heavy blow to the Tatar forces, the Agadorji tribe and the Mabe Mongolian tribe. Based on this, Baiming should pay them. It did not matter how much the military pay was. Yang Qindong wanted to discuss the other party. Besides, if Baiming gave the first city 1 tael of silver, then the army would have 1 tael of silver less. This was a matter of decreasing one's losses and increasing one's gains. No matter how much they did, it would never be too much. Zhang Quan naturally expressed a clear rejection of Yu Mian's request. In his words, most of the money from Baiming's imperial court was used to develop firearms and train the new army. Even the Datong city's military pay could not be truthfully spent. How could there be any money left to give to the first city? All in all, the first negotiation between the two sides was like a lion opening its mouth. At the same time, it was also testing the other party's bottom line. Relatively speaking, today's negotiation was much more pragmatic. Especially after knowing that the negotiation time was only 3 days, Zhang Quan put down his arrogance. He did not mention those impossible requests to stimulate the two sides. Instead, he put forward some practical requests and conditions for the two sides to be allies. The negotiation began to enter the normal track. When the attitude of both sides began to become gentle, suddenly, a soldier outside the door reported that 2 centurions from the Baiming army had come. They said that they had important matters to discuss with Zhang Quan and Su Dai. The negotiation had to be terminated because of this. Young Mansion. The 4-man post at the door became an 8-man post. At the same time, the number of patrolling soldiers on the streets of the first city began to increase. Even the divisions and regiments that were training in the ice and snow outside the city also gathered and returned to the city. All kinds of signs indicated that something big must have happened in the city. Yang Qindong was in the warm study room. Beta Persei, who was standing beside him, was reporting the situation to him. Young master, I heard that 300 people escaped from the Baiming army. They suddenly disappeared. As soon as he received the news, Lord Yu increased the speed and strength of the patrols in the city. Our young mansion has also made sufficient preparations. The troops that were training outside the city are also returning to the city. Director Feng of the Security Bureau is dispatching people to secretly search for them. After reporting all the information he knew in one breath, Beta Persei took a breath and then waited for Yang Qindong's instructions. 300 people escaped? What's going on? Yang Qindong's expression became serious at this moment. If this was Baiming's plan, these 300 people were likely to cause chaos in the city. Of course, it was only 300 people. In a city with a population of more than 50,000 people and an army of more than 30,000 people, it was not a big deal. According to the security bureau in the inn, it was because many Baiming soldiers were very interested in the show performed by our publicity team. They wanted to watch the show, but the higher-ups did not allow it, so they escaped privately. Beta Persei scratched his head and said a reason that was not a reason. What? At this moment, even Yang Qindong was confused by these words. Just to watch a performance, 300 people had disappeared. This was indeed beyond his expectations, and it made him feel like it was child's play. Beta Persei also felt ridiculous when he first heard the news. But since it was reported by the security bureau and reported to the 6th young master, it should not be wrong. Who would dare to joke about such a big thing? This was a very serious problem. Yes, that's what was reported. Young master, what do you think? Beta Persei carefully asked Yang Qindong how to deal with it. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he fell into deep thought for a while. After a while, Yang Qindong seemed to have made up his mind and said, Beta Persei, go and see where the publicity team is performing today. Find those people and arrest them all. Okay. Beta Persei became excited when he heard that there was a chance to make a move. By the way, young master, how many people can I bring? Take 10 guards with you, then ask Tiger Mang for a battalion of soldiers. That should be enough. Isn't it just 300 Baiming soldiers? By the way, don't make too much noise when you arrest them. Bring them back when you find them. Yang Qindong chuckled. He obviously had a general idea in his mind. Since Baiming himself had such a loophole, he would certainly take advantage of it. He wanted to know something from these soldiers. Beta Persei did not know the specific thoughts in Yang Qindong's mind, but since it was an order from the sixth young master, he just had to execute it to the letter. He nodded and agreed. After a while he turned around and left the inner court. Chapter 762. Brother Beta Persei, what are you doing in such a hurry? Did something good happen? Seeing Beta Persei's anxious look, Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu, who were not on duty, saw it. The relationship between the two of them had always been good and they were always inseparable. Seeing the two of them, Beta Persei's eyes lit up. The sixth young master gave me a task and I'm going to complete it. How about this, both of you and 8 brothers will come together. Fuyun Restaurant was one of the top 5 restaurants in the beginning city. It covered an area of more than 10,000 square meters and had more than 200 tables. In particular, there was a large open space in the middle of the restaurant with a cement floor. It was perfect for performing some large-scale programs. As early as a month ago, Fuyun Restaurant had contacted the publicity department and wanted to invite them to perform in the restaurant. Today was the official day. Since the morning, all the tables in the restaurant had been occupied. Even so, there were still many people who wanted to buy a place to stand with silver. For a moment, the restaurant owner was so happy that he could not close his mouth. At about 9 o'clock in the morning, the staff of the publicity department who were ready at the back of the restaurant had already made all the preparations. As the director, Shui Qing kept walking in front of the girls of the publicity department, repeatedly telling them not to be nervous. When the performance started, they just had to perform according to the usual rehearsal. A group of very beautiful girls, each of them wearing the military uniform of the Cold Front, with beautiful berets on their heads, looked valiant and heroic. Today they were going to perform the scene where the god of war commanded the army to defeat Agadorji of the Tartar tribe. Of course they could not perform the entire scene. They only chose the moment when the entire army charged. In order to achieve a sufficient stage effect, Shui Qing mobilized a total of 220 girls of the publicity department. In other words, not only were all the 200 students recruited later on, but also some of the cultural backbone staff from Crimson City. This was to create a magnificent scene with many soldiers and generals. Since everyone had to go on stage, Kikij was naturally one of them. Not only did she have to go on stage, but she also had to appear as a character with status and lines. Kikij had a heavy responsibility on her shoulders. The reason why she was able to stand out so quickly was inseparable from her usual hard work, and naturally, it was inseparable from her current identity. As for Beta Persei, after he fell in love with Kikij, he told everything to the sixth young master. After getting his consent, he asked for advice on what to do. Perhaps in his eyes, the sixth young master was omnipotent. The answer given by Yang Qindong was simple: chase after her. To put it bluntly, he had to be thick-skinned, show more concern and interact more. After a round of pestering, his chances of success would increase by a lot. This was the reason why a good girl was afraid of a pestering man. Beta Persei naturally carried out Yang Qindong's orders to the letter. Whenever he had time, he would come to the publicity office. At the very beginning, it was under the pretext of inspecting work, but after a long time, even Shui Qing knew that this favorite of the sixth young master liked the little girl Kikij. Naturally, he gave the green light. When everyone knew about this matter, Kikij's identity and status also stood out. Even director Shui Qing was polite to her, because everyone knew how powerful pillow talk was. Fifth brother Yang had a high position and power in Crimson City, not to mention brother Beta Persei, who was in a higher position than him. With Shui Qing's care, coupled with her dancing foundation, her figure was very good, and her appearance was very decent. It was impossible for Kikij not to stand out. This time, she was entrusted with a heavy responsibility and arranged to play a very good role. This was not the first time Kikij had gone on stage. A week ago she had performed for a while in the largest immortal abode restaurant in the first city, and her performance at that time was very good. But this did not prevent her from being nervous this time. Before going on stage, she was still constantly taking deep breaths, forcing herself to calm down. The backstage was nervously and orderly preparing. The hall of the Fuyun building was even more crowded. Nie Jingyi and the others, who were mixed in the crowd, were anxiously waiting. They rushed out of the inn and then came to the Fuyun building at the fastest speed. At the door they paid a certain amount of silver. It could be said that after taking out all the silver they had the opportunity to squeeze in. Speaking of which, he was lucky to have some silver on him. Compared to some of the other Beiming soldiers who had escaped, most of them were blocked outside the restaurant because they did not have enough silver. If they were in the Dadong prefecture, perhaps those soldiers would find ways to cause trouble to express their dissatisfaction. But when they saw the mercenary warriors standing in front of the Fuyun building, they did not have any thoughts of causing trouble. This was other people's territory, and they were facing the legendary elite mercenary warriors. They really did not have the courage to test the law. Finally, it was 9 o'clock in the morning and the performance began. On the 300 square meter concrete stage, a loud horn sounded, and 60 to 70 warriors, with excellent figures rushed from the backstage to the performance platform. One flag after another was waved in their hands. Just this appearance alone attracted waves of cheers from the people below the stage. Perhaps it was because of the tall and straight figures of the female soldiers, or perhaps it was because the heroic spirit on their faces was not much inferior to the men, or perhaps it was because of their good looks, but they received a full house of applause as soon as they went on stage. Among the people who cheered were Nie Jingyi and some of his companions. Amidst the cheers, the female soldiers with lines began their performance. Through their mouths, they explained the matter of the Tatar army besieging the city with nearly 50,000 soldiers. Then they showed that the mercenary warriors were not afraid of difficulties, were not afraid of life and death, and were brave enough to fight. After all, it was a performance. Due to the influence of the venue and the surrounding environment, it was impossible to perfectly show every battle. It was just a description of some special battles. But even so, it still made the audience below the stage very excited. Cheers came one after another, and it didn't stop from the beginning. Fuyun restaurant was very lively. Outside the restaurant, Beta Persei arrived with 10 guards and a battalion of 400 soldiers from the independent regiment. Since Beta Persei was personally mobilizing the troops, Deputy Regiment Commander Xan Honghai naturally had to cooperate. He personally led a battalion of soldiers to express his sincerity. When they arrived outside the restaurant, they saw more than 200 soldiers wearing the Beiming army uniform outside the door. Arrest them all, kill those who resist. Beta Persei only glanced at them for a moment before issuing the military order. Immediately, the soldiers led by him rushed towards the Beiming soldiers who were still stretching their necks, trying to make a move in the restaurant. Before they could figure out what was going on, these soldiers had become prisoners. Some of the brave Beiming soldiers did not resist when they saw that the mercenary warriors were arresting them. They only shouted, "Why are you arresting us? We followed the Beiming messengers to your place. You can't treat us like this." Their reply was to gag them and then take them away on the street. They were all tied up and had black cloth gagged over their mouths. More than 200 people did not resist and quickly disappeared outside the restaurant. Beta Persei did not even look at these people. He only stared at the inside of Fuyun restaurant and asked the company commander in charge of the security of the propaganda department, "How many Beiming soldiers entered the restaurant?" "About 60 or 70 people. They are very easy to recognize. They are all wearing the Beiming uniform." The company commander stood at attention, saluted and replied respectfully, "Good, you guys guard outside. If you find any Beiming soldiers who have escaped, take them down immediately. If there is any resistance, you can take measures." Hearing that so many people had entered the restaurant, Beta Persei's eyes darkened, and a murderous aura emanated from his body. This time there was Kikij in the performance. Last night, she had someone send a message to him, hoping that he could come and watch her performance. Just from this point alone, the progress of their relationship was still very smooth. However, Beta Persei did not immediately agree. Following by Yang Qindong's side was a heavy responsibility, and he could not even grasp his own free time. But now, 60 or 70 Beiming soldiers were in the restaurant. If they had the intention of destroying this performance, wouldn't Kikij be in danger? He thought that if someone really did that, he would not mind starting a massacre. I hope you guys are just watching a performance. If you have other ideas, you will definitely regret coming to this world. After making up his mind, Beta Persei called the deputy commander of the independent regiment, Xan Honghai. After discussing with him, they decided on a plan to enter the restaurant and capture the people. It's best not to make a move if you can. After all, there are still many people inside who are watching the show. Thinking that the sixth young master was very protective of the people under his rule, Yang Qindong reminded everyone to wait. At this time, inside the Fuyun restaurant, the performance had already lasted for more than an hour and was now coming to an end. They had broken the Tatar army's attack and defeated the enemy. Now was the time to cheer for the victory. The sun sets in the west, the red clouds fly in the sky. The soldiers are shooting, the camp is back, the camp is back. Comrades in arms are as close as brothers. Victory has summoned us together. You are from Tianan, he is from Hebei. We are all brothers of the god of war. One after another, military songs that stirred the hearts of the people resounded on the stage. Under the chorus of the actresses, who were full of 5 tones, it brought climax after climax to the people present. The people who were encouraged by the performance clapped their hands until they were red, but the applause still continued. Nie Jingyi was also mixed in the crowd. His eyes were shining, and his heart was filled with excitement. After watching this performance, Nie Jingyi was deeply encouraged. Although time was limited, such a novel performance was the first time he had seen in his life. This kind of performance method was unheard of in the future. Even if the time was short, it still made him extremely excited and even deeply affected. Chapter 763. This was a real army. They were fearless in the face of a strong enemy and used all means on the battlefield. The soldiers were united and sincere. Only those who grew up in such an army could be called a real soldier. Only those who grew up in such an army could talk about great ideals. In comparison, the Baiming Datong prefecture he was in was far inferior. They only dared to attack when the enemy was few and far in between, as if they were afraid of angering the other party. When the enemy came in large numbers, they would turn around and flee without even fighting. They didn't have the slightest bit of courage to face difficulties. Anyone with ability and ideas could determine the strength of the enemy. At this moment, Nie Jingyi's eyes were filled with envy. But when he thought about how he was a member of the Baiming army, and a centurion at that, the hot blood that had surged out of his body was forcefully suppressed. This is just a dream. In the future it's better to go back and be a centurion. Sighing like this, Nie Jingyi slowly lowered his head. It was unknown whether he was lamenting his bad luck or lamenting that he was born at the wrong time. At this moment, a strong murderous aura suddenly attacked him. Nie Jingyi, who had practiced martial arts since he was young and had a good physique, instinctively dodged to the left. A large hand slid down where he was standing just now. Thinking that it was close, he suddenly turned around and saw a soldier in a green military uniform standing behind him. At this moment, both sides looked at each other and saw each other clearly. The soldier from the independent regiment felt a burst of red in his face that his attack had failed. Seeing that most of his comrades had succeeded in one strike, reaching out to control the target he was staring at, but he had failed, this feeling made him very unhappy. Brat, I don't care who you are. If you surrender now you can still live. If you resist you'll be asking for trouble. Since the sneak attack had failed, the soldier from the independent regiment didn't hold back and directly put forward his own request. No matter what, Nie Jingyi was still a centurion. How could he allow himself to be captured just because of one sentence? Although he had disobeyed a military order this time, it should be Chiliarch Su Dei who came forward to capture him. How could it be a mercenary army that made a move on him? I didn't cause any trouble. Why are you arresting me? He would not allow himself to be captured, but he also did not want to fight with the mercenaries. He knew how powerful they were, and the performance just now had given him a whole new understanding of them. It's not up to you to decide whether or not you committed a crime. Please come back with us. Sensing the unyielding aura emanating from Nie Jingyi, the soldier from the independent regiment didn't choose to attack directly. Instead, he wanted to use words to make Nie Jingyi surrender. That's impossible. I'm a centurion of Baiming. I can't go back with you. Nie Jingyi shook his head. He didn't know what they meant. However, he knew that once he was caught, he would be a captive and would lose his freedom. This was not what he wanted. Then don't blame me. Seeing that Nie Jingyi wasn't listening to them, the soldiers of the independent regiment could only shake their heads. They didn't care that there were still some commoners around them who didn't know what was going on and directly grabbed Nie Jingyi. At this time the performance was coming to an end. A group of female soldiers from the publicity department were lining up on the stage to take their curtain call. The audience below the stage was enthusiastically applauding, affirming the other party's wonderful performance this time. However, it was at this time that the sound of fighting came from below the stage, attracting everyone's attention for a moment. There were nearly 70 Baiming soldiers in the crowd watching the performance. About 60 of them were locked down and subdued at the first moment. After all, the Baiming army uniforms they were wearing were too eye-catching. However, there were still 9 people who were resisting and they all had some strength. Among them, Nie Jingyi's fight was the fiercest and the fastest to end. Bang! A fist collided with a fist, and the soldier from the independent regiment was knocked back 2 steps. Then a long leg kicked him in the chest, causing him to stumble back again. If it weren't for the fact that there were still many commoners standing behind him, he would have fallen to the ground. After repelling the soldiers of the independent regiment, Nie Jingyi instinctively wanted to escape. However, he quickly shook his head helplessly because he didn't know when, but he realized that there were already 4 mercenary soldiers standing beside him. They were staring at him covetously. Suddenly, the sound of fighting came from the crowd. Waves of screams could not be stopped from coming from the Fuyun building. Even on the stage, some of the female soldiers were trembling all over. It was one thing for them to fight and kill on the show, but it was another thing for them to fight in real life. Restlessness began to appear, but it was quickly suppressed. The commoners had already noticed that many mercenary soldiers had appeared on the scene. They were all tall and sturdy and their eyes were fierce. The appearance of these people gave everyone a sense of relief. Some people were extremely excited. When they watched the performance just now, everything was rehearsed. How could it be as exciting as a real fight between dragons and tigers? Some of the bolder ones even found a good seat and sat down, as if this was the real show they were going to watch today. On the stage, Beta Persei appeared with 10 of his guards. As soon as he appeared, the publicity director Shui Qing hurriedly walked over. "Brother Beta Persei, what's going on?" "It's fine, it's just a small matter." Beta Persei's face revealed a confident expression. He first nodded at Shui Qing, then at Kikij, who was looking at him affectionately. Then he shouted at the top of his lungs, "Everyone pay attention. I'm Beta Persei from the Yang residence. This place has been controlled by the mercenaries. Everyone don't panic and there's no need to be crowded. This matter will be over soon. Everyone just treat it as a free show." Beta Persei's voice was already loud to begin with, and this shout from his dantian was even louder. Sure enough, with this shout the crowd quieted down a lot. Although most people didn't know Beta Persei, he said that he was from the Yang residence. Wasn't that someone by the god of war's side? Even the god of war had sent someone, what else did they have to worry about? After Beta Persei revealed his identity, the hot-tempered commoners quickly quieted down. Then they all looked at the fighting scene with the mentality of watching a show. In the resistance of the 9 people, 4 of them were quickly subdued. Only 5 people, including Nie Jingyi, were still fighting with the independent regiment. Nie Jingyi was fighting 1 against 4 and was already at a disadvantage. With his ability, the soldiers of the independent regiment wouldn't be able to gain any advantage in a one-on-one fight, but it was hard to say if it was 1 against 4. He was having a hard time holding on and felt that the world was unfair. Seeing that everyone's eyes were on him, he thought of a plan and shouted, "What's wrong? Aren't the mercenaries very powerful? Why are you playing the trick of winning with numbers? Don't you dare to have a fair one-on-one fight with me?" Logically speaking, it was unreasonable to shout like that. On the battlefield, the most important thing was to kill and defeat the enemy. Who cared how many people you had? If you had fewer people, it only proved that you were not capable enough. But this wasn't a battlefield and there were so many commoners watching. Nie Jingyi's shout attracted a lot of discussion and actually gained the support of some people. Deputy Commander Xan Honghai, who was commanding the soldiers, was startled when he heard this. He didn't think that there would be such a smart person among the Baiming soldiers who knew how to take advantage of the situation. He couldn't help but look at Nie Jingyi and think about what to say. But before Xan Honghai could say anything, Beta Persei, who was standing on the performance stage, had already spoken. "On the battlefield, only life and death matters. No one will talk to me about fairness. But since you want a one-on-one fight, I'll fulfill your wish. Ba Daojiang, go test his ability. Be careful, don't kill him. This person has some ability and should be someone with a position." "Yes, brother Beta Persei." Hearing that there was a chance to show off his skills, Ba Daojiang immediately grinned and nodded excitedly. He took the task and strode towards the fighting field. With Beta Persei's shout, the 4 independent soldiers who were attacking at the same time stopped. Their faces were all red. They felt that it was a humiliation that they couldn't take down their opponent after such a long time. But since brother Beta Persei had given the order, they had no choice but to obey. Beta Persei's shout attracted everyone's attention and they fell on Ba Daojiang, who was walking down the performance stage step by step. Ba Daojiang came from the underworld and his boxing skills were unparalleled. Later, he joined Yang Xie and became a guard by the 6th young master's side. He even had the opportunity to receive guidance from Yang Qindong. His strength was no longer the same as before. Now that he had a chance to show off in front of everyone, he would definitely grab hold of this opportunity. First he strode forward. His target seemed to be Nie Jingyi. However, as he was walking, he happened to encounter a Biming squad leader who was locked in a fight with an independent soldier. When he walked past, he suddenly threw a punch. Caught off guard, the Biming squad leader blocked it with his own fist. However, it was precisely this attack that sent him flying. His body landed 3 to 4 meters behind him before he could land. His face was contorted in pain and a trace of blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. It was obvious that this punch had caused him serious internal injuries. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the independent soldier who was fighting with him stepped forward and subdued him. With just one punch, he had defeated a Biming squad leader who had the ability to fight for a long time. This blow first caused the audience to fall silent. Then there was a round of applause, expressing everyone's admiration for Ba Daojiang. Ba Daojiang cupped his fists at the audience with a smile on his face. After that, he continued to move forward. Another Biming squad leader was sent flying with a punch. This forced the other 2 Biming soldiers who were still fighting to stop and let themselves be restrained. They had already seen how powerful Ba Daojiang was and knew that they were no match for him. There was no point in asking for trouble. Chapter 764. With that, Nie Jingyi was the only one left standing on the stage. However, his expression was extremely solemn. It was obvious that he had seen through Ba Daojiang's strength. In just a short while, Ba Daojiang had already appeared in front of Nie Jingyi. He then asked in a disdainful tone, "Kid, do you want to take a punch or surrender? Let's fight. It's rare to meet an opponent like you." Facing Ba Daojiang's strong pressure, Nie Jingyi did not choose to retreat. Instead, he moved one of his shoulders, showing that he would not surrender and would fight to the end. All right. Ba Daojiang was still afraid that his opponent would give in. If that happened, he would not be able to enjoy the fight. Now Nie Jingyi's choice was exactly what he wanted. Laughing loudly, he suddenly dashed to Nie Jingyi's side and threw a punch. Nie Jingyi, who had been observing Ba Daojiang's movements, quickly dodged to the side when he saw the punch coming towards his right shoulder. At the same time, he kicked out with his long leg. Having seen Ba Daojiang's moves, Nie Jingyi would not be stupid enough to take his punch head-on. Boom. The kick landed on Ba Daojiang's waist, and the two separated immediately after the contact. In the first round, Nie Jingyi gained the upper hand with a kick. On the other hand, Ba Daojiang missed his punch and even suffered a kick. It was obvious that he had lost points. "Ba Daojiang, can you do it?" The sixth young master has said more than once that even a lion uses its full strength to catch a rabbit. If you are careless again, you should retreat. Beta Persei, who was on the stage, saw everything clearly. Nie Jingyi did have some skills and his body was agile enough. However, the main reason he was kicked was because of his carelessness. Beta Persei's reprimand made Ba Daojiang's face turn red. "Brother Beta Persei, give me one more chance. I will definitely take care of this kid." Ba Daojiang was determined, but at the same time he raised his guard. He rushed forward again, his eyes fixed on Nie Jingyi's body. At this moment, Nie Jingyi's body tensed up. Although he seemed to have gained the upper hand in the first round, the rebounding force of his kick was not weak. He could still feel the numbness in his legs. This also proved the strength of the Eight Paths River. Right now, the other party's heart was filled with caution, staring at him, giving Nie Jingyi the feeling of being stared at by a fierce tiger. It was as if no matter what he did next, he would not be able to avoid the other party's attention, and would not be able to succeed. Nie Jingyi was shocked by Ba Daojiang's aura, and he didn't dare to act rashly. Ba Daojiang didn't care about that. His body moved forward and his fists rushed forward. His hands were like two dragons emerging from the sea, and it seemed as if he was only attacking and not defending. However, Nie Jingyi could not be fooled by this illusion. Facing the Ba Daojiang that was prepared, if he chose to attack now, he would definitely suffer. After all, their strengths were not on the same line. There was still a huge gap between them. Tong tong tong. Nie Jingyi didn't dare to attack again. Facing the two fists that were rushing towards him, he could only defend. Then the long fists smashed on his body. Every time they hit, he couldn't help but grimace in pain. It was really unbearable. After a dozen punches like this, when Nie Jingyi felt that he couldn't lift his arms anymore, Ba Daojiang once again used a strong grappling hand. After pressing down on Nie Jingyi's neck, he threw Nie Jingyi out. Nie Jingyi, who was already in a daze from the beating, tried his best to land on his back to reduce the pain he might suffer. Just as he landed and let out a muffled groan, another two soldiers from the independent regiment came over and held him down, completely subduing him. "Take away all the troublemakers. Beta Persei, who was standing on the stage, waved his hand. Then he nodded gently at the publicity director Shui Qing and gave Kikij a reassuring look. He then strode out of the Fuyun building surrounded by Peng Yu and the others. Not long after Beta Persei and the others left, Zhang Quan and Su Dei rushed over with dozens of Baiming soldiers. However, the answer they received was that Baiming soldiers were causing trouble here and had all been taken away. If they wanted to get them, they would have to go to the beginning city's barracks. Zhang Quan didn't dare to go to the beginning city's barracks. With just Su Dei and the dozens of people he brought, they wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between the enemy's teeth. Helpless, he thought of Yu Mian. At this moment, he could only ask for help from the city lord's mansion. Besides, the 300 Baiming soldiers were taken away in confusion. They were then taken to the mercenary barracks outside the South City. Here they were detained separately and interrogated repeatedly. The general idea was that they left the Datong city's diplomatic mission without permission. Were they trying to pry into the secrets of the mercenaries and the city's defense, etc.? Faced with such a crime that could be beheaded, all the Baiming soldiers shook their heads like a rattled drum. They were really just curious about the show they were going to star in. That was why they had the courage to rush out of the inn. They really didn't have any other intentions. Putting aside how anxious and defensive the 300 Baiming soldiers were, Nie Jingyi, who had been taught a lesson by Ba Daojiang, felt a little dizzy. Then he was taken to a very quiet place with a black mask on his head. The reason why it was very quiet was because he could no longer hear any sound in his ears. After an unknown amount of time, he finally heard footsteps. Then the black mask on his head was taken off. While feeling the dazzling sunlight in front of him, Nie Jingyi also saw a very young man standing in front of him. The young man had a smile on his face and looked at him with interest. At the same time, he was also sizing up the person who had come. He was young, handsome, and had an indescribable temperament. It felt like he was as heavy as a mountain and as wide as the sea. Even though he was smiling, he still gave Nie Jingyi a great deal of pressure. "Who are you?" When Nie Jingyi saw that Beta Persei, who had previously commanded the troops, was standing beside the young man, and looked like a servant, his instincts told him that the young man in front of him was definitely not a simple person. Impudent. How dare you casually ask questions in front of the great Ming's Duke of Loyalty? Before the young man could answer, Beta Persei's roar had already sounded. Great Ming's Duke of Loyalty. Hearing this, Nie Jingyi's legs went soft and he knelt on the ground with a plop. This was not to say that he did not have a backbone, but that Yang Qindong's name had already resounded throughout the Great Ming. Even in the Datong Prefecture's military camp, the soldiers often talked about this topic when they had nothing to do. In the hearts of the soldiers, this Duke of Loyalty had long been a legend and had become a synonym for strength and invincibility. "You've heard of me?" Seeing Nie Jingyi kneeling in front of him, Yang Qindong's face did not change at all. Perhaps he had long been used to all of this. "Yes, I've heard of the Duke of Loyalty and know that you're very good at fighting." As Nie Jingyi answered, he was also a little excited. He could actually meet the Duke of Loyalty in person and even talk to him. This was something he had never dared to dream of before. At this moment, Nie Jingyi was like a 7th-ranked county magistrate who had been summoned by the emperor. His heart was only filled with excitement and excitement. My level of fighting is just average. It's mainly because the soldiers under me put their lives on the line that I'm able to achieve glory time and time again. Yang Qindong said with a modest face. Nie Jingyi did not seem to agree with this point of view. Perhaps it was because he had understood some things in the city yesterday, but he could not help but say, "That's also the ability of the Duke of Loyalty. Furthermore, you love your soldiers like your children. To be able to become your subordinate is a matter of happiness and pride. How could they not put their lives on the line?" These words, which seemed to be a bit of bootlicking, caused Yang Qindong to burst into laughter. "Yes, I know you. You're called Nie Jingyi, right? I didn't expect you to be so good with words. In that case, if you were given a chance, would you want to join the mercenary army?" The Duke of Loyalty actually knew him and even took the initiative to recruit him. This honor immediately made Nie Jingyi extremely excited. However, in his mind he suddenly thought of his mother in the Datong Prefecture. Although his father had died in the battle with the Walla a few years ago, and although he had not married a wife because of his pride, he still had a mother who lived in the Datong Prefecture. If he joined the mercenary army now, what would his mother do? Once the Ming army and the embroidered uniform guards found out, his mother would most likely be doomed. Nie Jingyi's expression constantly changed. Yang Qindong only sized him up and did not have any intention of urging him. After a few breaths of time, Nie Jingyi raised his head and said very seriously, Duke, although I really envy the treatment of the mercenary army and admire your courage in defeating the enemies of the grassland, I still cannot join the mercenary army. Is it because of your mother? Yang Qindong waited for Nie Jingyi to finish speaking before asking with a smile. You know this too? Nie Jingyi's face revealed a surprised expression. How could he have known that not long after they left Datong Prefecture, the intelligence personnel of the Security Bureau received the news? They reported the situation to the higher-ups of the Security Bureau and informed the First City. At the same time, they also began to investigate the entourage. And Nie Jingyi was the main target of the research, so his situation was naturally investigated very clearly. Of course I know. I also know that you were born in the military, I know that you are very filial, and I also know that you have very high standards. This year you are 25 years old and still haven't married. This is not because you can't afford to marry, but because you haven't met the right one. How about it? After watching the performance of our female soldiers today, they all have good figures and good looks. Is there anyone you like? Chapter 765. Yang Qindong smiled faintly as he spoke. Every time he said a word, Nie Jingyi could not help but shiver. The Duke of Loyalty was really omniscient. He even knew the situation of a small centurion like Nie Jingyi. Didn't that mean that the background of the 1,000-man diplomatic group had long been known? Nie Jingyi was still in shock, but when he heard Yang Qindong's next words, he was so shocked that his mouth opened so wide that an egg could be stuffed in. What if I told you that even if you joined the mercenary army, your mother would still be fine, and I would allow you to choose an unmarried female soldier as your wife? What would you choose? Is there such a good thing? Nie Jingyi was indeed shocked and could not help but ask. Haha, I don't think I need to lie to you with my status. Yang Qindong did not answer directly, but this sentence was the answer. What was Yang Qindong's status? Even the Emperor of Baiming and the Emperor of Southern Ming were very afraid of him. Even the king of the grassland Yes Hen would be frightened when he heard his name. How could such a person casually joke with a small centurion like Nie Jingyi? As soon as he asked this question, Nie Jingyi knew that he was overthinking. Since there was such a good thing, there was no reason for him to refuse. He immediately knelt on the ground and kowtowed 3 times to Yang Qindong and said, Your subordinate, Nie Jingyi, is willing to join the mercenary group and serve the Duke for life. Ah good. Nie Jingyi finally made his choice. Yang Qindong was overjoyed and walked forward to help him up. Then he looked at him and said, Not bad. Looking at your pure eyes, you must be a man of your words. Since that's the case, I will accept you. Nie Jingyi was convinced by Yang Qindong, but he didn't stay in the beginning city. Instead, he was released along with the 300 Baiming soldiers and returned to the inn. In other words, Nie Jingyi was loyal to Yang Qindong, but the nature of his work was different. He had become a chess piece buried in the Datong Prefecture. Normally, he would pass on important military information, but at critical times he could play a decisive role. Yang Qindong treated Nie Jingyi quite well. He directly proposed that after returning to the Datong Prefecture, there would be a specialized person in charge of his affairs. There would also be a specialized person who would contact him. This way they could do their best to prevent his identity from being exposed and putting him in danger. At the same time, he also prepared a lot of money for Nie Jingyi. Yang Qindong only had one request, and that was to bribe his superiors as soon as possible, and then continue to be promoted. The position of a mere centurion was still too light. What Yang Qindong wanted was a general who held real power and could come into contact with more secrets. Nie Jingyi also guaranteed this. He did not doubt his own ability. He was still so young and was already a centurion. This was enough to explain everything. If he had gold and silver to clear the way, he was very confident that he would be able to charge up in a short period of time and obtain a higher position. Zhang Quan went to the city lord's mansion, and not long after, Yu Mian personally went to the barracks to communicate. He took back the 300 captured Baiming soldiers. What Zhang Quan and Su Dei did not expect was that none of the 300 Baiming soldiers returned with injuries. In other words, they were only interrogated when they went to the mercenary barracks, and were not interrogated. On this point, Su Dei was very emotional. He felt that the mercenaries were indeed an army that followed the rules, and only this kind of army would be able to fight against the Mongol cavalry and win every battle. Humph! They are just ordinary soldiers, how could they be valued by the mercenaries? Zhang Quan had a different opinion. He felt that it was because the captured soldiers were too low level that they did not attract the interest of the mercenaries. This was the end of the farce. According to Nie Jingyi's previous thoughts, Neither Zhang Quan nor Su Dei punished the 300 soldiers, and only gave them a warning. It was very reasonable that the law could not punish the masses. After the farce, Zhang Quan and Su Dei went to the city lord's mansion again. They had wasted another day for nothing, and the negotiations still had to continue. In the Yang mansion, Yang Qindong was deep in thought with his eyes closed. Beta Persei stood at the side, not daring to say a word. Only when there was movement outside the door and Tiger's Mane's figure appeared did Beta Persei leave the house with light steps. What's going on? What happened? Tiger's Mane heard from the guards that the sixth young master did not even have dinner after returning from a trip. He hurriedly rushed over from the barracks. At this moment, he was naturally asking Beta Persei, who had been staying by the sixth young master's side. This is hard to say. Beta Persei shook his head, not knowing how to answer. What do you mean by hard to say? Just say what you have to say. Tiger's Mane glared at Beta Persei as if he was questioning him. Tiger's Mane's loyalty to Yang Qindong was naturally unquestionable. If there was only one person in the army who did not betray Yang Qindong, it must be Tiger's Mane. Because of this, Beta Persei also trusted him very much. He immediately told him about how the sixth young master left the mansion and privately went to the barracks to meet Nie Jingyi. Tiger's Mane, as soon as the young master appeared, Nie Jingyi was subdued, but at the same time, he also said some things about the Datong mansion. According to him, the upper echelons of Baiming have been saying bad things about the young master in the army. They have always said that the young master is a traitor and have been on guard against him. And I heard that many soldiers in the Baiming army believe this. Beta Persei's answer finally made Tiger's Mane understand what had happened. Before he didn't know, so he wasn't worried. But now that he knew, he smiled and said, I thought it was something big. Don't worry, young master is very broad-minded. He definitely won't worry about such a small matter. Yes, the young master will not worry about such a small matter, but not long ago, the Security Bureau sent a report about the Baiming Imperial Court. I heard that many people there have put forward a proposal, saying that they want to order the newer Gandu Sea to cut off our supply route from the sea. What, they really dare? Hearing this, even Tiger's Mane's expression changed, and then he glared at Beta Persei. Why don't you say it all at once? You have to say it one by one. After saying this, Tiger's Mane strode into the house. As soon as he entered the room, he came in front of Yang Qindong and said, Young master, don't worry, I'll immediately take the independent regiment to the newer Gandu Sea. Didn't they want to cut off our supply route? Then we'll flatten them first. Yang Qindong, who had been sitting on the chair with his eyes closed, opened his eyes at this moment. The independent regiment has such a strong combat power that they can destroy the entire Baiming army in the newer Gandu Sea with their strength alone? They can also control every city and ensure the safety of our supply route? We can't do it. Even though Tiger's Mane was so confident, he could not help but say with a bitter face at this moment. The intelligence of the Security Bureau had long recorded that there were many Baiming guards in the newer Gandu Sea area. Their military strength was about hundreds of thousands of people, and they were very widely distributed. The furthest two guards were thousands of miles apart. With such a large territory, how could an independent regiment occupy it so easily? Not to mention the independent regiment, even if the army in the beginning city was sent over now, they might be able to defeat the Baiming guards, but it was impossible to occupy that place and maintain the stability there. That place was too big and there were too many guards. Unless they had enough military strength, they would not be able to control it. Not to mention, Yang Qindong was not ready to fall out with Baiming. According to him, whether it was Baiming or Southern Ming, they were all made up of Han people. In the future, if he wanted to lead the Han people to the top of the world, a strong population base was essential. Unless it was necessary, he did not want to make things difficult for the Han people, and he did not want to be enemies with the Han army. Otherwise, this was equivalent to digging his own foundation. In a situation where he did not want to fight, if the Baiming Imperial Court really ordered to block the supply route, Yang Qindong would really suffer. After all, the ability of the beginning city to self-produce was too low. If there was no continuous supply of resources from Chichen City, not to mention developing on the grassland, even surviving would be a problem. Tiger's Mane did not speak, and Yang Qindong once again fell into silence. He now needed to think of a way to stop the Baiming Imperial Court from giving orders to the newer Gandu Sea area. As for how to do this, it was truly a difficult matter. The negotiation was still going on in the city lord's mansion, and it was getting smoother. Perhaps it was because Zhang Quan's attitude was very firm, but in the end Yu Mian still took a step back. He did not have the intention to ask the other party for military pay. Of course, Zhang Quan also did not mention that the beginning city would be under the management of the Baiming Imperial Court. In the end, the two sides reached an agreement, and that was to issue a joint statement to the outside world that the Datong Prefecture and the beginning city were allies. If one side was in trouble, the other side would unconditionally send troops to support. The agreement was finally reached. Presumably, after knowing this news, Yes Hen had to consider more things when he wanted to take action. This made Zhang Quan seem to be very satisfied. After completing his mission, he rejected Yu Mian's suggestion to stay in the first city for a few more days and left the city with the 1,000 guards he had brought with him. After Yu Mian sent Zhang Quan off, he strode to the Yang Mansion to meet Yang Qindong. In the hall of the Yang Mansion, Yang Qindong looked at the joint statement made by the two sides and smiled. "It's just a piece of waste paper." Yang Qindong said this for a reason. The statement only said that the two sides were allies. If one side was in trouble, the other side would provide support. However, it did not specify how many reinforcements would be sent. In other words, if one side was really in trouble, the other side could send 10,000 people, 1,000 people, or even 100 people. With such a big loophole in front of him, Yang Qindong did not believe that Yu Mian and Zhang Quan would not be able to see it. However, both sides did not point it out. This already meant a lot. Chapter 766. Ignoring such a big loophole and pretending not to see it, this already showed that both sides were just putting on a show. They just wanted to use the tiger's skin to scare the other side. However, Yang Qindong could also understand that information was so undeveloped. Even if one side was attacked, by the time the news reached the other side's ears, it would be too late. What was the point of sending reinforcements? Yu Mian naturally understood this logic. He also understood that Zhang Quan only wanted righteousness. He wanted to use the first city to deter some of the Mongolian troops who wanted to attack the Datong Prefecture. As for sending reinforcements, it was better to forget about it. In the past few days, he had heard more than once that the mercenaries' food was so good that it was not much worse than that of a eunuch like him. Just the food alone was something that the Datong Prefecture could not afford. In any case, the negotiation finally came to an end. Yu Mian could be considered to have completed a political task. While he relaxed, he also focused his attention on another matter. He looked at Yang Qindong and asked, "Sixth young master, have you really made up your mind to take over Tulu City?" "Yes, I have to take over that place. Previously, I sent people from the Security Bureau to investigate the situation there. The information has been reported back. There are only 10,000 Tatar troops that belong to Tuachuo-Buhua. 5,000 of them are infantry. In front of the mercenaries, it is not worth mentioning." Yang Qindong admitted with a smile. Since he could say this, it was obvious that he had made up his mind. Although Yu Mian was the governor, his power was much lower than Yang Qindong's. There were some things that he only had the right to suggest but not the right to make decisions. Now that he heard that Yang Qindong seemed to have made up his mind, he carefully said, "Sixth young master, Tulu City is a barrier to the northwest of Baiming. It is also a buffer zone between us. Once we break through there, there will be no obstacles between us. We can see swords and spears at any time." "Yes. What I want is to see swords and spears at any time. Let me tell you this. I have received news that the Baiming Imperial Court is considering giving an order to New Urgan Dusi to cut off our logistical supply route. If this is the case, what about the army's provisions? What about the security of the first city? They forced me to do this." Yang Qindong said this with a helpless look. After he finished speaking, he said something that shocked Yu Mian. "This time, not only do I want to break through Tulu City, but I also want to personally go to Baiming's capital. There are some people that I want to meet." No. Yu Mian was really frightened this time. He said with a panicked expression, "Sixth young master, a gentleman does not stand under a dangerous wall. If the Baiming Imperial Court really wants to deal with you, if something happens in their territory, the entire Yangxia Empire will be in chaos." Seeing that Yu Mian was so anxious, Yang Qindong was very gratified. At least this meant that the other party was really looking out for him. He said confidently, "Don't worry. As long as we occupy Tulu City, it is equivalent to opening the door to the northwest of Baiming's capital. Unless the other party has made the decision to fight to the death with the mercenaries, they will not dare to touch me casually. Besides, I've already given orders to the Security Bureau and Crimson City. Some elite Cold Vanguard soldiers will enter the capital as soon as possible. A regiment of elite Cold Vanguard soldiers should be enough to intimidate the enemy. Yang Qindong waved his hand nonchalantly. To others, entering Baiming's capital at this time might be extremely dangerous. However, to Datsang Yang Qindong was really nothing. Unless the other party could kill him in an instant, as long as he was given a little time to react, no one would be able to kill him. Yang Qindong was so confident that he made a decision. Yu Mian knew that there was nothing he could say. The only thing he could do was to take care of the city during the time when the sixth young master was not in the first city. Let this city develop quickly and not let people worry about it would be a great merit. And just 3 days after Yu Mian and Yang Qindong met, there was a big movement in the first city's military camp. The 3 divisions of the Cold Front and the fully replenished Jurchen Cavalry Regiment finally set off. This time they would leave the first city and go all the way north, straight to the Siberia area controlled by the Golden Horde. They would fight the so-called Golden Family head-on. And for this expedition, Yang Qindong had provided 200 carriages of military supplies. In the Yang residence, in front of Yang Qindong stood the commander of the 3 divisions, Wu Xing, the political commissar Qinbo, the 3rd Regiment Changyang, and the commander of the Jurchen Cavalry Regiment. Yila Yang Qindong looked at Wu Sheng and the other 3 and asked in a deep voice, "This expedition is of great significance. I believe that all the grassland tribes will pay attention to you. My request is also very simple. You have to show the power of the mercenaries. You have to beat the enemy until they can't eat or sleep when they hear your name. Do you have the confidence to complete this mission?" "Yes." Naturally, Wu Sheng and the other 3 replied in unison. "Good, I also have confidence in you. But I still want to tell you that along the way to the north, you can attack while occupying some important military positions. If necessary, you are allowed to expand your troops. I ask you to fight steadily. 200 carriages of logistics supplies won't last long for the army. You must have a safe supply route behind you. This is also the foundation of your survival. Do you understand?" Yang Qindong knew that war was about money and logistics. In modern warfare, a cannonball could cost tens of millions of dollars or even more. Even a gun could cost $1 or more. This was also why countries often negotiated with each other when they encountered problems. Unless it was absolutely necessary, they would not easily use force. But at this time, although the army did not have heavy firearms to consume, the soldiers still needed money to eat, drink, and defecate. Without sufficient rations as a foundation, it was easy for the morale of the army to become unstable and problems would arise. Fight steadily and step by step. This is what we ask of you. I will also be here waiting for the battle report of your victory." At the end of the meeting, after Yang Qindong said these words, the 3 divisions and the Nuzhen Cavalry Regiment, a total of about 10,000 people, left the first city and headed north. At this time it was still snowing heavily outside. Logically speaking, such weather was not suitable for mobilizing troops. Even the escorting of food supplies had brought great difficulties. However, Yang Qindong did not want to wait any longer. A person's life was limited. If he wanted to achieve his life goal, he had to seize every minute. As for the heavy snow, he would have to experience it eventually. Instead of slowly adapting to it in the future, it was better to start now. "Young master, it's snowing heavily everywhere. Some places don't even have roads. It's really troublesome for the army to move." Tiger's Mane stood beside Yang Qindong on the tower of the first city. He looked at the back of the army that was gradually disappearing and said with some emotion, "Yes, it's a little troublesome. However, a truly strong army will not stop because of the bad weather. We mercenaries want to create miracles and make everything impossible possible." Yang Qindong first nodded in agreement, then said in a very heroic tone. After saying this, he looked at the surrounding generals. "Let's go. Since everyone is here, let's have a meeting to discuss the matter of attacking Talu City." Talu City was also known as Talu City. It was west of the bordered white banner of Inner Mongolia. Ming Jin Yuzi's record of the northern expedition. Yongle 8th year, 1410, Judi's northern expedition. Jin River moraine is more than 10 miles away. There is an ancient city near the road. The instructions said, "This is Talu City. I have hunted here." The southeast area of Talu City would be the future Zhangjiago. That place was already in Hebei. From there, it would be much closer to the capital of Baiming. In other words, once they occupied this place, it was equivalent to setting up a Damocles sword in the northwest of Baiming. It could fall at any time and act as a deterrent. The meeting was held in the newly built war room in the city lord's manor. In front of a huge sand table, Yang Qindong divided the work among his subordinates. City Lord Yu Mian, you will remain in the city for this battle. You will be in charge of the law and order of the city. There is also the matter of the army's rations. It won't be long before the new batch of resources from Crimson City arrives. You will also need to register them. Commander Su He, this time your Tatar cavalry will be the vanguard. I know that Amu Gulong, who is guarding Talu City, is your old friend. If possible, it would be best if you could take down the city without fighting. On the other hand, if the other side is stubborn, then don't blame us for taking action. At that time, blood will flow like rivers. You must be prepared for this. Tiger's Mane, you will lead your independent regiment and follow closely behind Commander Su He. Once the battle starts, you can provide support at any time. Oh right, you can choose two 100mm cannons from the warehouse in the city to be used when sieging the city. Commander Lu Jua, you will lead the 2nd Cavalry Regiment at the back. They will be in charge of transporting the rations. At the same time, the 3 newly built regiments will be under your command. However, this time they are not going to fight but to build roads. In the warehouse, City Lord Yu Mian has already prepared shovels, brooms and other items for you. He wants you to clear a slightly flat road to Talu City. The 3 new regiments are mainly responsible for protecting the safety of our rear flank. Be careful of the attacks of the Tatar cavalry on the nearby Saihan mountain. After saying this, Yang Qindong seemed to have thought of something. He looked at Yu Mian and said, when the next batch of supplies arrives, the corresponding cement factory equipment and staff will also be in place. We can't rely on Crimson City for everything, especially cement. It's too heavy and troublesome to transport. If First City wants to develop, we still need some factories. This cement factory is in the first batch of construction. We need to build it earlier. Once we can make our own cement, many roads will need to be rebuilt in the future. You have to worry about this matter. Chapter 767. Yes, 6th young master, I will remember it. Yu Mian nodded heavily. Finally, Yang Qindong's gaze fell on Zhui Feng, the leader of the 1st Cavalry Regiment. You don't have to participate in this battle. You are mainly responsible for the safety of the origin city. If there are any small people who want to make a move, it will depend on your performance. In addition, your regiment is also responsible for receiving supplies. If there is a need, there are still 7,000 captives in the logistics regiment. Although they are usually coolies, some of them used to be cavalry and can play a role on the battlefield. If there is any danger, they can be used. Is there any problem? Reporting to the 6th young master, there is no problem. But the next time there is a battle, can you not let our regiment stay at home? Zhui Feng's face had a hint of pleading. The army was mobilized and only their regiment was left. This made it very difficult for him to explain to his brothers and officers. Okay, I will agree to your request. Yang Qindong's face was full of smiles. He liked this kind of fighting spirit army. If once a battle broke out, everyone wanted to retreat and hoped that others would go to war, then this army would not be far from defeat. Speaking of attacking Tulu City, it was not a matter of 1 or 2 days of preparation. Basically, the regimental leaders knew about this news half a month ago. According to Yang Qindong, it was already the end of November. He was still preparing to celebrate the new year in the capital of Baiming, so this matter could not be delayed. Although the new year of 1453 was at the beginning of February, it was still very tense with only 2 months. Once the battle meeting started, the regimental leaders went back to make preparations. And the most excited were the 3 new regiments that had just joined the mercenary army. A regiment had 5 battalions, and a battalion had 4 companies and 400 people. A total of 6,000 soldiers of the new regiment had only trained for less than 2 months. Suddenly, a great battle was about to break out. The soldiers who wanted to contribute were all very excited. At noon, the regiment gave the order to set off early tomorrow morning. Every soldier had half a day off and could go back to accompany their families. Batu left the barracks excitedly and returned to his home in the beginning city. As soon as he entered the house, he saw his mother Batama and sister Kikij waiting for him. In addition, Beta Persei, who would soon become his brother-in-law, was also there. Batu, are you afraid? As soon as she saw her brother come back, Kikij hurriedly greeted him. The relationship between the brother and sister had always been very good. From this point of view, it was already confirmed. Although Mother Batama didn't say anything, her loving and caring gaze had already proved everything. Mother, sister Young, second brother, I'm not afraid. When it came to Beta Persei, Batu really wanted to call him brother-in-law, but he knew that this relationship had not been made public yet, and only a limited number of people knew about it. Besides, he didn't want his comrades to think that he had entered the army through nepotism, so it was easier for him to address Beta Persei as brother. "Ah, how is it? I told you that Batu wouldn't be afraid." Beta Persei, who had been waiting for the news, suddenly laughed out loud. This laughter caused Kikich to be a little dissatisfied. She glared at Beta Persei coquettishly. "Do you think everyone is like you, only excited when talking about war? This is the first time our Batu is going to the battlefield." "Sai, it's okay if it's the first time. There's always a first time for everything. Besides, the new regiment is only responsible for repairing the road at the back. There won't be any danger. This time, the 6th young master wants them to feel the atmosphere of war." Beta Persei waved his hand indifferently. He really didn't think that the new regiment was going to war, so naturally there was nothing to worry about. At this time, Batama finally spoke. "Beta Persei is right. Batu is going to feel the atmosphere of the battlefield this time. They haven't been training for long. I'm afraid that even if they want to go to the front line, the god of war won't agree." "Sai, that's right." Beta Persei chuckled. In exchange, Kikij rolled her eyes. Similar things happened in other families as well. Basically, the family members were a little worried, but these new recruits were all excited. It was as if they were really going to the battlefield and killing the enemy. Early the next morning, the army that had been preparing for more than 10 days set off. The first to attack was the 3,000-strong Tatar cavalry regiment. Commander Suhi rode a tall horse and entered the city from the south gate. Then he passed through the streets and led the army out of the west gate under the cheers of the people. They went straight in the direction of Tulu city. After Suhi's Tatar cavalry regiment, the mercenaries walked on the streets one after another, and then went out of the city to the battlefield. This was specially requested by Yang Qindong. He wanted all the soldiers to experience such a welcome ceremony and let the people in the city feel the strength of the mercenaries. In this way, if there is a shortage of soldiers in the future, more young men will sign up to join the army. Tulu City. Originally a territory controlled by the Tatars, the general Amu Gulong who was guarding here, also belonged to the Tatars. He was a general under Tuachuo Buhua. When translated into Chinese, Amu Gulong meant peace. In fact, as his name suggested, he had been very safe. Even when Yeshen joined forces with Agador to attack Tuachuo Buhua not long ago, he was very safe in Tulu City. So much so that even after such a long time had passed, no one had come to cause trouble for him. All of this naturally could not be attributed to a name, but because of Tulu City's special geographical location. From here to the southeast was Baiming's territory, and it would not be too far before reaching the capital of Baiming. It could be said that this was a dividing line, completely separating Baiming from the Mongol tribes. In such an environment, it was like being roasted on a fire, and they could be attacked by the Baiming army at any time. Because of this, it was the safest place. Even Agadorji didn't have any ideas about it. Baiming was fully developing their military and opened up their commerce. It was said that they also wanted to open up a navy and build a defense line. Before they were fully prepared, they would definitely not recklessly start a war with the Mongol tribes of the Central Plains. Not to mention, the Hatao region not far from Datong was already occupied by Yeshen's Warawara. Baiming was afraid that someone would attack them from Tulu City. Who would be so blind to find trouble with them? In such an environment, Amu Gulong was very comfortable and in a good mood. When the heavy snow danced in the sky, his hanging heart was even more relieved. In such weather, no army would be willing to move. This was also the safest time of the year. However, during this period, which was regarded as the safest, there was suddenly news that the beginning city's army was moving in the direction of Tulu City. They had already passed by Saihan Mountain, and the front army was only 100 miles away. As soon as the news came out, Amu Gulong, who was resting in his residence, was shocked. He quickly called his deputy general Shibei to discuss how to deal with it. Amu Gulong was not tall and could only be said to have an ordinary figure. In comparison, Deputy General Shibei was burly and looked like a fierce general. When the two of them met and listened to the report from the scouts in the room, their expressions became grave and deep at the same time. Amu Gulong's brows were tightly knitted together. What was going on in the beginning city? The reports from the scouts had already made it very clear. For this reason, he had even sent scouts into the city to investigate. Facing the beginning city, which had opened 4 gates and looked like it was not defended at all, they did not seem to be worried about any scouts coming to inquire about the news. Therefore the scouts went and returned quickly. A series of titles such as the Duke of Loyalty, the God of War, the Messenger of Tingri, and a series of things that had happened recently poured into Amu Gulong's ears. It was precisely because he understood more that he felt more afraid of the beginning city. Even Agar Dorji's 50,000 cavalrymen were wiped out. With the 5,000 cavalrymen and 5,000 infantrymen in the city, could they really defend the city and block the attack of the God of War's army? Amu Gulong's heart was not confident. After hesitating for a moment, he asked tentatively, "General Shibei, what do you think?" "We can't defend it." After hesitating for a while, Shibei gave his answer. "Yes, we can't defend it, but we can only defend it. I have received great Khan Tuachuo's kindness. At this time, there's no reason for me to give up the city. If they have the ability, they can just kill me." Amu Gulong gritted his teeth and made his final decision. Seeing that the commander was determined to die, Shibei hurriedly comforted him. "General, a real man knows when to yield and when to stand tall. I believe that even if the great Khan knows, he won't blame you." "It's not the same. Let's not talk about whether the great Khan will blame me or not. If I surrender, my conscience will be uneasy for the rest of my life. A person living in this world has to hold on to something. Alright, there's no need to say any more. I've made up my mind. I will lead 5,000 cavalrymen to fight to the death with the enemy. If I unfortunately die in battle, Shibei, you and 5,000 infantrymen don't think about holding on. You can choose to surrender. This is my order." Amu Gulong's moral character was still very good. He didn't have to force his subordinates to do anything. On the contrary, he gave them a way to live. This also made Shibei very excited. "General, don't worry. If you really die in battle, I will definitely collect your bones and bury you so that you can return to the foot of Tingri." "Thank you very much." Amu Gulong cupped his fist and said. 2 days later, under the city of Tulu, the vanguard of the mercenaries, the Tatar group, arrived. According to the order of Yang Qindong, He called for a fight at the foot of the city, saying that he wanted to see Amu Gulong to talk about the old days. Both of them were generals under the Tatar forces. Naturally, they knew each other before, but their relationship wasn't very deep. This time, when the two sides met at the beginning, Amu Gulong said to He with a look of contempt, "So it's General Su. Aha, I didn't expect you to still be alive. What's wrong? When your master Agadorji escaped, didn't he order you to cover the retreat? Did you defeat the mercenaries?" Chapter 768. He knew that He had already surrendered to the mercenaries, yet he still dared to say such words. It was obvious that he was looking down on He. But how could He be so easy to deal with? He didn't care about the other party's mockery and said with a calm expression, "I am already a commander of the mercenaries. As for Agar Dorji, I have a clear conscience. I have already repaid him by exchanging my life for his son's." This was also the truth. He had indeed made this request, and Yang Qindong had also satisfied him. Otherwise, he would rather die in battle than surrender. Facing He's answer, Amu Gulong didn't comment. He seemed to know that there was no point in discussing this topic at this time. "Alright, let's cut the crap. It's impossible to give up Talu City. Since the Great Khan has arranged for me to guard this place, unless I die, no one can occupy this place. Bring it on if you have the ability." After saying that, Amu Gulong waved the long sword in his hand, looking like he was about to block an army of 10,000. Facing Amu Gulong's desperate look, He shook her head, reined the horse and turned back. Suddenly, she led the 3,000 cavalrymen of the Tatar cavalry regiment back, leaving the 5,000 cavalrymen of the other side who had already set up the battle formation there. The mercenaries retreated just like that, leaving Amu Gulong puzzled. But the other party had already retreated, and it was a very orderly retreat. At this time, even if he rushed forward, he wouldn't be able to gain any advantage. So, he could only lead the 5,000 Tatar cavalry back to the city. "Congratulations, General." Seeing Amu Gulong leading the army back to the city in one piece, the deputy general led his men to welcome him. He spoke with a happy face as soon as he saw Amu Gulong. Sigh. On the other hand, Amu Gulong didn't seem very happy. He just shook his head and said, "They won't give up on this place. There will be a big battle in the end. This time they came just to test my thoughts. Next time we will meet with weapons." Amu Gulong's guess was right. The reason why He retreated without even fighting was because he considered that the sixth young master had given him the first task of persuading the other party. Since it was obvious that he couldn't persuade them, he naturally had to send the news back first and then prepare for battle. Yang Qindong was in the rear of the army, following Tiger's Man and the independent regiment to Talu City. When the scouts at the front rushed back and reported that the generals of both sides had met but parted on bad terms, Tiger's Man immediately shouted, "Then let's fight. Do they really think that they are the best in the world just because they are guarding a broken city? If they provoke this daddy, I will blast their city gate with one shot. Let's see what they can be proud of." After obtaining the 100mm mortar, Tiger's Man's courage increased. A small Talu city with only 10,000 soldiers was really not in his eyes. Of course, shouting was one thing. Tiger's Man knew very well that in the end, it was still up to the sixth young master to make the decision. Therefore, after venting the emotions in his heart with a loud roar, he still looked at Yang Qindong with an expression of waiting for orders. "Go do as you think." Yang Qindong nodded lightly. Although he was not a murderous person, he had never been lenient towards his opponents. "If you are not convinced, then I will beat you until you are. If you are still not convinced, then I will send you on your way." After receiving the order, Tiger's Man immediately stood at attention. "Young master, don't worry. Leave this battle to me. I will definitely not let you down." Ah. Tiger's Man had been by Yang Qindong's side since he was young. He had witnessed every scene of the young master growing from a weak scholar to a god of war. Although he did not understand why the young master changed his temperament and suddenly became so powerful and unfathomable, he still liked the current young master very much. Yang Qindong created the Yangxia regiment, which was why Tiger's Man had the power and influence. He knew that all of this was given to him by the young master, so he was absolutely loyal to Yang Qindong. He was the kind of existence that could block a bullet and die for him at any time. The sixth young master had the most important position in his heart. Next, it would depend on his performance in the army. Although the independent regiment was in the limelight recently, there were not many opportunities to perform. Now that the opportunity had come, how could he give it up? After receiving the order, he put on a white cloak and walked out of the temporary military tent. He called the deputy commander Xan Honghai and said, "Leave 2 battalions to protect the 6th young master's safety. The rest of you follow me and speed up. Let's try to reach Tulu City by nightfall today." It was only a distance of 30 miles from where they were to the city. If it was summer, it would take less than 2 hours and a rapid march would be enough. But now there was snow everywhere and most of the roads under their feet had just been cleared. Marching in such an environment, it was naturally impossible to go fast even if they wanted to. After receiving the order, the independent regiment sped up their march, leaving 2 battalions behind to protect Yang Qindong's safety. The other 14 battalions were all rushing forward. When they saw the troops flashing past them one after another, leaving behind a trail of shadows that disappeared in front of them, Beta Persei, who was standing beside Yang Qindong, asked with some confusion, "Young master, don't we have to go with them?" "There's no need for that. Just let them do whatever they want. No matter how strong a person is, he can't rule the world. What we need to do is to wait for the good news from the front." Yang Qindong smiled with a very relieved look. This time, the number of mercenaries was not less than the other side, and they were accompanied by heavy weapons. If they still couldn't conquer the small Tulu city, it could only prove that Tiger's Man and Su He were not suitable to lead troops and could retire from active service immediately. Yang Qindong believed in Tiger's Man and Su He, and the two of them also believed in the soldiers under them. Speaking of which, during this period of time, they had not been idle in the beginning city. They only rested for 1 day every 7 days to tidy up their internal affairs and wash up. The other 6 days were spent crawling until midnight to train. Often, when the soldiers were sleeping soundly, an emergency assembly whistle would wake everyone up from their warm beds and run to the field to start training. At first, everyone did not understand this kind of training. They thought that if they did not have a good night's sleep, how could they have the energy to train? However, when every meal was filled with delicious fish and meat, they had nothing to worry about. Their nutrition could keep up, and they realized that this kind of training was not unbearable. On the contrary, everyone put in all their effort. With the idea of sweating more during training and bleeding less during battle, their strength increased day by day. When the individual strength of each soldier took a big step forward, the combat effectiveness of the entire army was a little terrifying. As the saying goes, soldiers are trained for 1,000 days to be used in a single moment. Now it was finally time to perform well. It was finally time to fight for military merits. No one was willing to fall behind. Everyone wanted to have a better performance and fight for more advantages and benefits for their future. Yang Qindong had always been willing to spend money. In the army, there were already rules that stated how many military merits could be obtained by killing a person. Under such stimulation, everyone only hated that there was no war to fight. How could they be afraid of war? After the military order was given, the horn of war was blown. The 14 battalions of the independent regiment rushed forward, giving people the feeling that they were afraid that if they were a step slower, they would not be able to make it in time for the great battle ahead and miss out on countless military merits. Under such an excited mood, supported by such strong confidence, more than 5,000 soldiers galloped forward on horseback. Once the snow was too heavy and their path was blocked, they would dismount and walk. In short, they had to reach the designated location as soon as possible and prepare for tomorrow's battle. Under Tulu City it slowly became lively. The number of military tents under the city also began to increase one by one. Battalions of the independent regiment arrived and set up their tents. They lined up horizontally and vertically in an extremely orderly manner. There were also some people who began to cook. Smoke rose in spirals. Everything was so orderly that Amu Gulong, who was standing on the city gate tower, shook his head. The enemy is not panicking at all. Looks like we have to give up on the idea of taking advantage of the fact that they haven't stabilized their footing yet. That's right. Look at how their tents are arranged neatly like a line. One can imagine the battle prowess of such an army. She said from the side, her eyes filled with envy. Even a general would want to lead a strong army. And the mercenaries in front of them were clearly a strong army. Right, how is the morale of the army? After giving up on the idea of sneak attacking the enemy, Amu Gulong felt much more relaxed. As for the time being, he would be safe from now until tomorrow morning. He could temporarily relax. When the issue of morale was brought up, Shibei's expression became somewhat unsightly. Not too good. When the soldiers heard that they were mercenaries from the war god's army, many of them were very afraid. Fortunately, we have always treated our brothers well. Until now, there have been no signs of desertion. But if the enemy besieges the city, it will be hard to say as time goes on. Shibei was also an extremely capable general. It was just that as the deputy general of the city, he rarely had the opportunity to display his abilities. But he usually treated his brothers very well. It was precisely because of this that when a great battle came, his subordinates were still very obedient. Even when facing the legendary war god's army, there was no one who fled without a fight. It could be said that his prestige played a significant role in all of this. But prestige might be useful in the short term. Once the battle dragged on and the enemy besieged the city, the psychological pressure would become greater and greater. It was hard to say what would happen in the end. They won't besiege the city. If I'm not wrong, I'm afraid they will choose to attack the city tomorrow. Amu Gulong understood. With such heavy snow, if they didn't have a city to rely on and just camped in the wilderness like this for a long time, no one could guarantee that there wouldn't be any problems. Since the war god was so good at fighting, there was no way he wouldn't understand this. Chapter 769. Shibi did not say anything else. He was now a fish on the chopping block. The choice had already changed. All he could do was to fight with all his might when the enemy attacked the city. As for the rest, life and death were up to fate. In Tulu City they did not choose to launch a sneak attack. This made Tiger's Mane, who was ready to give the enemy a heavy slap in the face, a little disappointed. Looking at the firearmed soldiers lying in ambush beside the tents, he waved his hand and said, "All right, the enemy will not come out. Everyone go into the tents to keep warm. Come, inform the 6th young master that we have safely arrived at the city and are ready to attack tomorrow morning." Under Tulu City, swords were drawn and bows were bent. It looked like a war would break out at any time. It was dark. At the rear of the army, Luju's 2nd Cavalry Regiment was also rushing to clear the road. According to Yang Qindong's intention, they wanted to open up a wide road from the first city to Tulu City. This would be beneficial for the communication between the two sides. At critical times, it would also be beneficial for the mutual support of the army. At this time, the road that the army was clearing had already reached the area controlled by Saihan Mountain. The intelligence from the reconnaissance camp had already shown that there was a Tatar army of tens of thousands of people here. Previously, they were the ones who pulled water from Alahomiki City, which was not the first city yet. Because of this, they were tricked by the mercenaries. But for some reason, since the establishment of the first city, they had not made any military movements. They seemed to be very tolerant. A dog that bites does not bark. This was an old saying among the people. When completing this mission, Yang Qindong had told Lu Zhuo that they must not be careless and give the enemy a chance to attack them. Therefore, when they arrived at this area, the 2nd Cavalry Regiment's vigilance was raised a lot. The original sentries were also spread out for 2 miles to ensure that no matter if the enemy approached, they would be able to detect them early and make timely preparations. Inform the 3 new regiments that it is getting dark. Prepare to set up military tents. Inform the cooks in each battalion to prepare for dinner. Lu Zhuo rode on his warhorse and looked at the 6,000 new recruits who were waving their shovels and brooms as he gave the order. The performance of these 6,000 recruits was pretty good. At least they didn't seem to be slacking off. Speaking of which, to be able to join the army at this time, which one of them wasn't working hard? After all, there were still 7,000 captives from the battle with Agador. In terms of combat power, they were much stronger than the new recruits. If it wasn't for the issue of loyalty, where would the 6,000 new recruits come from? They were worried that once the 7,000 captives were released, they would become a mainstream force and disrupt the current management model of the mercenaries. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that each of these 6,000 people was very precious. They had made countless comparisons before they got what they wanted. Such a rare opportunity, of course, everyone wanted to grasp it well. This was also their first mission. Although they appeared as coolies, every new recruit still worked hard to perform, hoping to leave a good impression on their superiors. The sky was getting dark and some work couldn't be done. Lu Zhuo gave the order for the new regiments to rest, but as the commander he couldn't rest. He called his 3 battalion commanders. Ma Xiong-shan, Ding-shan, Temu-er, the 4 of us will have to work hard tonight. We will take turns to be on night duty. Is there a problem with each of us working for 4 hours? No problem. The 3 battalion commanders immediately patted their chests and promised. Inside the tent, a stove had already been lit. The warmth of spring here and the freezing cold outside formed an extremely obvious contrast and difference. At this time, Yang Qindong was sitting beside the stove, looking at the telegrams sent from Chichen City. Ever since the incident with Yang Taizhu and Qin Shuquan, Chichen City had used this opportunity to conduct a large-scale investigation. The future 6th Madam Wan Xiaoyu was in charge. Security Bureau Chief Yang San, Inspector Bureau Chief Xin Yu, Political Department Member Mo Qingyu, and Navy 1st Division Commander Gao Xiong formed a team of 5 to cooperate. Handing such an important task to Wan Xiaoyu, it was impossible to say that Yang Qindong wasn't worried at all. After all, she was just a girl and she was only 16 years old. A girl and so young, could she bear such a heavy burden? But Yang Qindong still made this decision, and this was because of Wan Xiaoyu's special identity. First, she was the future 6th Madam. This meant that Wan Xiaoyu didn't have to worry too much about doing things. Even if someone wanted to deal with her, they had to consider the consequences of angering Yang Qindong. Second, as a native of Chichen City, her parents were both factory executives. This allowed Wan Xiaoyu to have a deeper understanding of many things in Chichen City. This was something that the other madams couldn't compare to. Thirdly, letting a little girl do this would make it easier for others to have the idea of underestimating the enemy. If this was the case, it would be equivalent to losing a round before the battle. Because at any time, underestimating the opponent could bring about irreversible consequences. Fourth, and the most important point, ever since Wan Xiaoyu became the head of Chichen City's publicity department, her performance in all aspects was excellent. She had already shown management skills that didn't match her age. This was also why Yang Qindong thought highly of her. Since she could manage the publicity department so well, she could probably complete the self-inspection mission beautifully. And the facts also proved that Yang Qindong's judgment of people was very accurate. Since the beginning of the operation, everything went smoothly. From the telegram sent, from the beginning of the operation until now, they had already investigated various local and military problems. There were 134 cadres, and this number was still expanding. It seemed that there was no end to it. Among these cadres, some had been arrested for corruption, some had abused their power for personal gain, and some had even used their power to abuse their power. For example, they had coerced other women to serve them, and then they would get a good job in exchange for sleeping with them and so on. Needless to say, as a woman, Wan Xiaoyu was naturally very angry about this. As long as there was such a leader, once they fell into his hands, he wouldn't even bat an eyelid when arresting people. Sigh. Gently putting down the telegram in his hand, Yang Qindong sighed from his mouth. Chichen City had only been established for a short period of time, and there were already so many internal problems. This was under Yang Qindong's high salary. It could be imagined that if the salary wasn't high, the number of criminals would be more than doubled. Chichen City was only a part of an island, and that was it. One could imagine what the officials of the Great Ming Dynasty were like. The so-called, "a year of honest magistrate, 100,000 snowflake silver," was probably the most appropriate description. Yang Qindong was still thinking about some related problems when the curtain of the military tent was pushed open from the outside. Beta Persei, Tai Hu, Bai Zhuo, and the others walked in. Suddenly the military tent became a lot more lively. "Everyone is here, find a place to sit." Looking at these elites under his command, Yang Qindong's face showed a smile. Everyone was the first to follow Yang Qindong, so they didn't treat him as an outsider. They each found a place near the stove and sat down. Then they looked at the sixth young master with an expectant look. They knew that there must be something important to discuss, because in the past when everyone appeared together, there would be more important tasks to carry out. Since they weren't outsiders, Yang Qindong didn't beat around the bush and directly said, "Tiger's Mane has already led the army to Tulu City. If nothing unexpected happens, there will be a good result tomorrow. Perhaps at this time tomorrow we will be staying in the city. Taking down Tulu City in one day." If someone else said this, they might not believe it, but since it came from Yang Qindong, Tai Hu and the others had no reason to doubt it. Their sixth young master was like this. Once he said something, he would always be able to quickly fulfill it. Yang Qindong had never thought that taking down Tulu City would be difficult. The difficult part was that he would have to enter the capital of Baiming. Although he had the powerful trump card of Daikara, he shouldn't be afraid of any danger. This Daikara was very mysterious and could make him disappear into thin air just in case. But in the end he was still a man, not a god. What if he was caught off guard, for example, when he was sleeping at night and his head was cut off? Even if he had Daikara, he wouldn't be able to change the outcome of his death. Although Yang Qindong's perception of danger had reached a whole new level due to the existence of the qi in his heart, and it should have been very difficult for anyone to kill him. However, there was always a chance, and Yang Qindong didn't want to gamble. This was also why he had asked Yang Heir to call Tai Hu and Bai Zhuo over. "After taking down Tulu City, I plan to celebrate the new year in the capital of Baiming. There are some things that have to be resolved. Now, I want you to accompany me to the capital. How about it? Are there any difficulties?" Yang Qindong still looked at Tai Hu and Bai Zhuo with a smile. Although he said that he was asking, he was actually informing them. Not many people knew that Yang Qindong was going to Baiming to celebrate the new year. For example, in the first city only Yumian knew. Tiger's Mane and Beta Persei already knew. Therefore when they heard this news, Tai Hu and Bai Zhuo were stunned. It was precisely because they had followed Yang Qindong for a long time that they knew better than anyone else what kind of attitude Baiming had towards the sixth young master. In a sense, Yang Qindong would be the person who would overthrow the Great Ming Dynasty. This could already be seen from the various signs he had shown. And for such a person, there were probably many people in Baiming and southern Ming who wanted him dead. One could imagine the danger of entering Baiming at this time. As subordinates, whether it was Tai Hu or Bai Zhuo, if they had a choice, they all hoped that Yang Qindong would give up on this decision. However, they knew that since the sixth young master had spoken to them so formally, he had already made his decision. What they needed to consider now was not dissuasion, but whether they could ensure the safety of the sixth young master. Chapter 770. No one knew what the current state of the Baiming imperial court was and what their attitude towards Yang Qindong was. Tai Hu and Bai Zhuo could not influence those people at all. All they could do was try their best to protect the sixth young master's safety. After about 7 or 8 seconds of silence, Tai Hu and Bai Zhuo stood up and gave a very standard military salute to Yang Qindong. "Sixth young master, we will do our best. Unless we die, we will not let anyone threaten your safety." Good. I understand what you mean. Yang Qindong's smile became wider. This was the result he wanted. As the saying goes, one must always be on guard against people. This time he went to Baiming's capital with no intention to kill anyone. However, if someone wanted to assassinate him, then sorry, he would have to take some heads and tell the world that the murderer would be killed. The camp of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment had been built. The soldiers of the 3 new regiments had finished clearing the snow. After eating, they quickly went to rest after a day of hard work. Outside the tent, there were only some soldiers of the 2nd Regiment patrolling with torches. Everything looked so tranquil and peaceful. However, a very dangerous aura was sweeping over from the southwest direction. The Tatar cavalry on Saihan Mountain had finally decided to make a move. Mazum was the leader of the Tatar cavalry on Saihan Mountain. When Tatar was glorious, he became a member of the great Khan Tuachuo army. He revealed his ability in constant battles and finally became the commander of tens of thousands of troops. Later, Yeshen and Agador conspired to deal with Tuachuo. Although they did not succeed in the end, the glorious Tatar army fell from prosperity to decline because of this. Mazum led his army back to Saihan Mountain. While accumulating strength, he waited for the great Khan Tuachuo's summons. However, it seemed that his luck wasn't that good. First, the team he sent to fetch water was robbed by the mercenaries, causing him to be furious. Then he received news that Agador's 50,000 cavalrymen were defeated. This made him, who originally wanted to teach the first city a lesson, suppress the anger in his heart and wait for another opportunity. He originally thought that even if the opportunity appeared, it would have to wait until spring next year. They never thought that in this season of snow, the mercenaries would suddenly make a move. They actually wanted to attack the city of Nataru. Moreover, the scouts sent news that the front and middle of the mercenaries had already passed by the side of Saihan Mountain. Now, what appeared in front of them was the rear of the mercenaries. Nataru City was his ally and everyone listened to Tuachuo's orders. However, facing the main army of the mercenaries' main army, Mazum was not confident that he could severely injure them and force them to retreat. He could only watch them pass by him. Until the rear army arrived, he saw hope. Your mercenaries are powerful. They can even defeat the main Tatar army led by Agador. I can't afford to offend them. However, how powerful could your rear army be? Especially when the information from the scouts indicated that there were still 6,000 new recruits in this 8,000-strong mercenary army, Mazum was even more certain that his opportunity had arrived. With the same number of troops, the gap between the recruits and the veterans was very big. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that on the battlefield in a chaotic battle, even 5 rookies might not be a match for 1 veteran. This was because they lacked combat experience and didn't know what to do in order to survive better and better. Therefore, under normal circumstances, no matter how many recruits there were, it was difficult for the veterans to pay attention to them. But now, there were only 2,000 veteran mercenaries and 6,000 new recruits. This gave Mazum hope. He called over his most valued general, Boris, and decided to give him 5,000 cavalrymen to launch a surprise attack on the rear of the mercenaries at the foot of the mountain and cut off their escape route. Not only would he be able to take revenge for the water, but it was also equivalent to giving his ally, Amu Gulong, another form of support. After Bila received the order, he immediately gathered 5,000 cavalry and left the city after eating an early dinner. When the sky was completely dark, he was already less than 10 li away from the rear army of the mercenaries. Damn this weather. Looking up at the sky, Bila found that snowflakes had started to fall again. He couldn't help but curse. If it was summer, he would be able to reach the front of the enemy with a few charges. Then he would charge into the enemy's camp and cut off the enemy's head. But now, in such bad weather, the heavy snow had submerged the hooves of the war horses. How difficult would it be to charge? Pass down the order. Everyone dismount and lead the horses forward. Maintain the strength of the war horses to the greatest extent and slowly advance forward. Helpless, Bila had no choice but to make such a decision. He threw away the war horses that had the most advantage. This was originally a helpless matter. Giving up the advantage and engaging in close combat with the enemy. Fortunately, they couldn't ride the war horses and the mercenaries were the same. The heavens were very fair and gave everyone the same environment. This way Bila was still very confident. The snow seemed to be getting heavier and heavier. It seemed like the light snow was about to turn into a heavy snow. Bora and his 5,000 cavalrymen were walking on the snowy ground. From time to time, they would hear the sound of soldiers falling into piles of snow, unable to extricate themselves and calling for help. The army moved slowly. After all, they were on the grasslands and were already used to such bad weather. Therefore, apart from being slower, they were still able to approach the rear army of the mercenaries step by step. After walking for 4 hours, they finally arrived at a place 2 li away from the camp. Due to the heavy snow, the vision of the scouts of the second group was greatly obstructed. Bila's luck wasn't bad. He was able to reach this place without being discovered. However, their luck came to an end. It was impossible for 5,000 cavalrymen to completely fool the enemy. Therefore, their appearance was still discovered by the scouts. Then, a white light suddenly soared into the sky and streaked across the top of Bila's army of 5,000. Flare. The white light instantly illuminated the entire ground and revealed the figures of the 5,000 Tatar cavalry. When the scouts saw the number of people on the other side with the help of this flare, the urgent sound of a horn resounded across the land. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! The enemy is cavalry. There are around 4,000 to 6,000 of them. After the scouts estimated the enemy's military strength based on their experience, they began to run as fast as they could, shouting and spreading the news. What is that? How can it be so bright? Could it be that the moon has fallen from the sky? The Tatar army that had been alarmed by the flares began to discuss among themselves. They had never seen or even heard of a flare before. At this moment, many of them were trembling in fear. Bila was also shocked by the flare. However, as the main commander, he knew that now wasn't the time to discuss this. How to stabilize the morale of the army and obtain victory was the most urgent matter. All soldiers listen to my order. Charge with me. The enemy only has 2,000 veterans and 6,000 recruits. We launched a surprise attack. They are no match for us. Bila used an extremely bewitching voice to speak. Then he used his actions as an example and led his horse to charge forward. If Bila could abandon his horse and charge forward with the 5,000 Tatar soldiers, it would be possible for them to launch a surprise attack over a distance of 2 li. They might even be able to obtain victory. However, the grassland warriors trusted their horses too much. They didn't know what kind of consequences such an action would bring. The flare shot into the sky. This scene was clearly seen by the commander of the 2nd Battalion, Dingshan, who was on night watch. His expression immediately became serious. He said to the soldiers beside him, "It's an enemy attack. Blow the whistle immediately. Everyone gather." Beep 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 beep. The hurried whistle sounded and spread throughout the entire camp. Out of conditioned reflex, all the soldiers who were still sleeping when they heard the whistle immediately reacted. They got dressed and got up. They took the weapons piled in their tents and rushed out of the camp to gather their troops. The 6,000 new recruits also rushed out of their tents one by one. However, many of the soldiers were still in a sleepy state. There were even some who showed dissatisfaction. During the day they worked hard to sweep the snow. At night, they still had to conduct an emergency training. Would they still have the strength to work during the day? The soldiers who had such thoughts were not the only one. They all had dissatisfaction on their faces. However, when they saw the commander of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment, Lu Zhua, walk in front of their troops, everyone's expression became serious. They were very clear that if they wanted to gain a foothold in the mercenary army, every performance was very important. They couldn't let the commander see their lazy side. "Soldiers, we have encountered an enemy attack. The enemy is less than 2 miles away from us. Now, everyone, please pick up the weapons in your hands and fight together with the soldiers of the 2nd Regiment. Please remember, this is not a training exercise. This is a real battle." After giving a salute, Lu Zhua gave a few instructions to the new regiment commander. Then he strode towards another new regiment. Wow! At this moment, the entire new regiment was like a boiling pot. They thought that it would be like the previous training. They didn't expect that everything was real. Were they going to participate in the battle? When they thought of their families and brothers and sisters who had been waiting for them to make military contributions in the beginning city, all the soldiers' eyes lit up. Batu was also in this new regiment. Originally, he was also a part of the people who had complaints in his heart. However, now he didn't have any complaints. There were only sparkling eyes and some were eager to give it a try. Chapter 771. Mother, sister, just wait for the good news of my meritorious service. Batu encouraged himself in his heart and made up his mind. Then his right hand gripped his saber even tighter. Very quickly, the recruits of the 3 regiments knew that this was not a drill but a real battle. The 6,000 soldiers suppressed the excitement in their hearts and turned it into motivation. Each and every one of them widened their eyes and clenched their fists. They couldn't wait for the enemy to appear in front of them and let them kill to their heart's content. "Recruit 1st Regiment, come with me to get your bows and arrows. Starting from the 1st Company of the 1st Battalion, come with me." The commander's voice sounded in the silent night. Squads of soldiers followed the voice and followed the shadow to the carriage behind them. They were in charge of escorting the supplies. Not only did they have all the necessities like bows and arrows, but they also had a lot of them. The 3 new regiments began to move. Lu Zhua also walked to the side of his 3 battalion commanders. "You guys go and prepare. We have already cleared a piece of the snow nearby and it's just enough for the cavalry to spread out. In a while, when the enemy is suppressed by the bows and arrows, you guys have to rush out when you hear the call to charge. Remember, the 6,000 recruits are watching you. Don't smear the reputation of our reinforced 2nd Regiment. Hearing Lu Zhua's instructions, the 3 battalion commanders said in unison, "Commander, don't worry. Just wait and see our performance." From the moment they received the news of the enemy's attack to the time they prepared for battle, Lu Zhua and his 3 battalion commanders didn't show any signs of panic. Everything was just as Yang Qindong had said. They had to maintain a fighting spirit at all times. Only then could they face the battle calmly and without panic. The mercenary camp was ready to face the enemy. Not far away, after a quarter of an hour, Bai La finally appeared with his 5,000 cavalrymen. If they had abandoned their horses, they would have saved more than half of the time. This way the mercenaries wouldn't have time to gather and prepare. Unfortunately, Bai La missed the golden opportunity to attack. Now that he appeared, he had already become a live target. The reinforced 2nd Cavalry Regiment didn't have any firearms and couldn't kill enemies from a distance. However, each of them had a strong bow and 50 arrows, which gave them great confidence. Bala finally appeared and saw the mercenary tents in the distance. But what puzzled him was that the surrounding area was obviously pitch black, and there wasn't even a single torch. It gave people the feeling that it was as silent as a dead camp. The scene in front of Bella gave her a bad feeling. However, since she had already rushed here, she had no choice but to release the arrow. He could even feel that there were pairs of eyes staring at him from the darkness, but he still gave the order for the entire army to charge. "Everyone, abandon your horses and charge forward as infantry. It's time to defeat the mercenaries and spread the fame of our Tatar cavalry. Let's kill them together." Holding his saber high in the air and a small wooden round shield in his left hand, Bora gave the order for the army to charge. "Kill." Under the command of their commander, the 5,000 Tatar soldiers roared and charged forward like a tide. In the darkness, the black color was like water, giving off a majestic and boundless aura. The mercenary tents were dark and silent. Under Lu Zhua's command, all the torches were extinguished. After waiting for a few minutes, everyone's vision returned to normal and they could clearly see the enemies in the distance. When they saw that there were so many enemies that it was as if there was no end to them, many of the recruits began to break out in cold sweat from their foreheads, bodies, and palms. Although their usual training was based on actual combat, and in the short 2 months of recruit training, they had carried out several military exercises, but exercises were still exercises and couldn't be treated as real. This time they were facing real enemies. If they weren't careful, they might lose their lives here. People would die in war. Everyone understood this principle. The only difference was who would be the one to die. Calm down, take a deep breath. Think of our family members who are waiting for good news. Think of the beautiful future. Look at the target, adjust your breathing and prepare to release the arrows. Mixed in with the recruits, there were many veteran squad leaders and vice squad leaders. They felt the changes in the recruits and constantly spoke words of encouragement. Voices sounded one after another, causing the originally nervous and restless recruit camp to become much quieter. At this time, the Tatar soldiers had already rushed to a position 80 meters in front of the camp. They had already entered the range of the bows and arrows. "Release the arrows." A loud shout suddenly sounded. It was the voice of the 1st Regiment leader of the recruits. The 2nd Regiment leader and the 3rd Regiment leader of the recruits responded in unison. Out of instinct, as soon as the voice fell, countless arrows broke through the air and shot towards the Tatar soldiers. Ding ding dang dang, dang dang ding ding. The sound of arrows breaking through the air, falling to the ground and colliding with shields and weapons rang out one after another. It was very lively. A wave of 6,000 arrows was shot out and collided with the Tatar soldiers. For a moment, countless black figures fell to the ground. At least 300 people suffered different degrees of arrow injuries. The effect is not bad. Again, release the arrows. Seeing that 6,000 arrows were shot out, but only 300 of them were killed or injured, the new recruit commander couldn't help but sigh in his heart. Recruits were still recruits after all. They were still too nervous, so much so that most of them didn't perform to their full potential. Voices of encouragement rang out. Compared to before, some of the recruits had already begun to adapt. When they took out their bows from their quivers, their hands were no longer trembling like before. Their gazes had also become much calmer at this moment. "Ah, did you see that? Recruits are still recruits. Even this can't hurt us. What are you afraid of? Let's kill together." Bai La was protected by a group of bodyguards. When the arrows came from afar, if it wasn't a shield in front of him, then it was a meat shield. After a wave of arrows, not only was he not injured, but even the bodyguards protecting him were not injured. This result naturally made him overjoyed. In an instant, his self-confidence exploded. He shouted loudly to encourage the soldiers below. At the same time, he increased the pace and speed of the charge. It was true that the opponents were recruits, and most of them hadn't gone to the battlefield. However, don't forget that they had trained in the mercenary camp for 2 months. Originally, they were selected from more than 10,000 young adults. Originally, they had a good foundation. In addition to the hard training, their strength had undergone a qualitative change in a very short period of time. The first wave of arrows didn't perform well because it was the first time and they were too nervous. However, when they let go of their nervousness and picked up their bows, many of the soldiers had already entered a state of mind. They had one eye open and the other closed as they aimed at the target. After adjusting their breathing, the arrows were released and flew out like meteors. Once they entered a state of mind, the advantage of the arrows began to show. Even if only 1/6 of the 6,000 soldiers hit the target, the result was still very frightening. When the arrows fell into the Tatar army, the result was that more and more soldiers were hit by the arrows and fell on the path of the charge. Good shot. Seeing the enemy falling to the ground one by one and only less than 6 out of 10 were able to reach the front, the commander Lujua laughed loudly. Come, blow the horn of charge. It's time for us to counterattack. Toot 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 toot. The loud and clear horn of charge had been blown. Along with this exciting sound, thousands of warhorses suddenly rushed out from the left and right sides of the battlefield. The warhorses galloped at high speed in the heavy snow, bringing up white snowflakes one after another. Correspondingly, there was dark red blood mixed with the white snow. The snow around the camp had already been cleared. The heavy snow had just covered the ground and it couldn't stop the warhorses from galloping wildly in this area. Under the high-speed charge of the warhorses, when the sabers fell from the sky, countless heads flew up from the ground, and countless blood splattered across the ground. The accuracy of the arrows had increased, and there was also the fierce attack of the warhorses. At this moment, the Tatar army had a feeling of being beaten silly. How did the arrows that were just for show become so accurate? Why did the frequency of the arrows become faster and faster? Why could the enemy cavalry gallop freely on the ground covered in heavy snow? Why? There were too many whys, but no one would answer them now. There were only the screams and cries of their companions for help. General, let's retreat. We have already lost 40% of our combat strength. If we don't retreat now, I'm afraid we won't be able to retreat. Seeing more and more of his companions being killed on the ground and the number of soldiers around him decreasing, a Chiliarch ran to Baila's side and complained tearfully. Baila still had a trace of unwillingness. He hadn't really fought with the enemy's recruits yet. He believed that if they could engage in close combat, their advantage would be obvious. This was also the main reason why he dared to bring 5,000 soldiers to fight against the 8,000 mercenaries. However, the situation on the battlefield didn't allow him to do so. Because if the battle continued, he was afraid that it would be like what the Chiliarch said. He would have no chance of escaping. At that time, even if he severely injured the mercenaries, what could he do? Clenching his teeth, his face was filled with unwillingness. After changing his mind several times, Baila finally gritted his teeth and gave the order, retreat. Retreat as you fight. If the enemy dares to charge over, counterattack with all your strength when the snow is thick. Chapter 772. The Tatar army retreated. They came like the tide and left like the ebbing tide. Seeing this, the 6,000 recruits cheered in excitement. Then someone shouted, kill. Then the 6,000 soldiers chased after the retreating Tatar army. Due to the terrain, the 2,000 veterans of the 2nd Cavalry Regiment had limited space to move around. When they chased the enemy into deep snow, the only thing they could do was to watch the enemy escape. At the very least, they could only fire a few more arrows. However, the new soldiers who relied on their legs didn't care about this. They charged through the thick snow and rushed in front of the Tatar soldiers running behind them. They brandished their swords and hacked at them. The number of soldiers in the new regiment was too many. Perhaps they didn't have much experience in fighting, or perhaps it was their first time seeing blood. However, when 4 or 5 or even more recruits simultaneously attacked a veteran, even if the veteran's strength wasn't bad, 2 fists were no match for 4 palms. In the end, after leaving behind nearly 100 corpses, they fled in a sorry state. Withdraw the troops and return to camp. Following the military strategy of not chasing a cornered enemy, Wuxia promptly ordered the overly excited recruits to stop. The snow in front of them was too thick. If they fought there, no one would be able to gain an advantage. And he wouldn't do a losing trade. The commander gave the order. Following orders was always the first lesson for the recruits. No matter how dissatisfied they were, they could only obediently retreat. Then they counted the spoils of war and the number of enemies killed. Originally, Bai La was prepared to counterattack halfway. Seeing that his last chance was gone, he sighed and led the army back to Saihan Mountain. He had already lost 2,000 soldiers and horses. Now, he no longer had any advantage in terms of military strength. If he continued to fight, he would only be looking for trouble. In the end, it wasn't that Bai La didn't have a chance to win. If he could have abandoned his horse at the earliest moment and suddenly attacked, the 3 new regiments wouldn't have enough time to assemble. Under the chaos, they wouldn't be able to form an effective resistance. Only the heavens knew what the result would be. The failure of command made Bai La return in failure. He didn't seize the fleeting opportunity. Wuxia ordered people to clean up the battlefield and count the results. At the same time, he ordered people to quickly report the results to the 6th young master at the front. In the warm tent, Yang Qindong, who was sitting beside the stove, already knew the news of the Tatar army on Saihan Mountain. However, he didn't care much. He was still very confident in Wuxia's 2nd Cavalry Regiment. As for the 3 new regiments, they might suffer some losses in this battle, but how could this not be a training exercise? It was not a bad thing to let them feel the true atmosphere of war and to let them know the cruelty of war. When Beta Persei hurriedly entered the tent and reported the results of Wuxia's 2nd Cavalry Regiment and explained that the Tatar army had retreated, Yang Qindong's face didn't show the slightest shock. It was as if all of this was expected and normal. In contrast, Beta Persei's reaction was not as calm as Yang Qindong's. Seeing that he didn't speak, Beta Persei said, "Young master, this Tatar army on Saihan Mountain is really wretched. We haven't even gone to find trouble with them, but they have already set their sights on us. Young master, please grant me permission. I'm willing to make a trip to the 2nd Regiment. Together with Regiment Commander Wuxia, we'll kill our way up Saihan Mountain and pull out this malignant tumor beside us." Yang Er was a little angry. Of course, he also wanted to make a contribution. Although he was a servant of the Yang family and should be by Yang Qindong's side, he didn't want to miss the opportunity to perform well on the battlefield. No need. Yang Qindong shook his head and said indifferently, "They won't be able to do anything. Let them stay there for now. When the time is right, we will naturally clean up these bugs." It was freezing cold outside and it was snowing heavily. It would be extremely difficult to rush up Saihan Mountain at this moment. There was no need to spend so much effort to deal with an enemy that couldn't threaten their safety at all. In the end, Saihan Mountain was not the target of this military attack. Taking down Tulu City and opening up the passage from the first city to Baiming was the first thing to do. With Yang Qindong's personality, once he set a goal, he would definitely achieve it. Everything else had to give way to him. Since Yang Qindong said that there was no need, Beta Persei knew that it was meaningless to fight for it. He nodded and said, "Young master, Tiger Man sent a message saying that they are ready to attack the city tomorrow. Do you have any other orders?" "Just follow the plan. I don't have any special orders." Yang Qindong shook his head again. Before leaving, he had talked to Tiger Man about what to do. This person had been with him for a long time and knew best in his heart what to do. Tiger Man really knew what Yang Qindong was thinking. If it weren't for the special geographical location of Tulu City, with just the 10,000 Tatar army, they wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure of the army. What Yang Qindong wanted was a safe passage. That being the case, Tulu City must be taken down. Not only that, but the damage must not be too serious. Otherwise, how could a ruined city house the army and the people? In this world of ice and snow, even if they wanted to rebuild the city, the conditions were not enough. So after setting up the camp, Tiger Man called Su He and the other generals to express his intentions. "Tomorrow, when we attack the city, we will try to deal with the enemy outside the city. Even if we kill our way into the city, as long as they are not rebels, don't kill them easily. We have to try our best to maintain the good nature of Tulu City. What we need is a city where people can live and garrison. This is the 6th young master's intention. Does everyone understand?" When they heard that it was Yang Qindong's intention, the expressions of the officers, who had not taken it seriously, immediately became serious. They all nodded, indicating that they would abide by the military order and try their best not to destroy the city and not to kill indiscriminately in the city. In the camp, the 10,000 mercenaries had a good night's rest. When the sun rose the next morning, smoke rose in spirals. From afar it looked like fog, like a paradise on earth. On the walls of Tulu City, Amu Gulong looked at all this and sighed. What will come will come. Since that's the case, let me go out of the city and see how powerful they are. General, be careful. Deputy General Shibi wanted to persuade him to defend the city with him, but when he thought about how cavalry could only be effective on the open ground, he suppressed the words in his heart. It's fine. People will die eventually. For a general, dying on the battlefield is a blessing, isn't it? Laughing, Amu Gulong put on the armor that his personal guards had given him, mounted his warhorse and led his 5,000 men out of the city. Below Tulu, both sides had already gotten into formation. From a distance they looked neat and orderly, their warhorses standing straight. They were like two colossi standing in the middle of the world. The snow had stopped falling in the early morning. For this battle, both sides had sent out soldiers to clean up the ground to ensure that the cavalry could exert their greatest advantage. The cleared ground in the middle of the battlefield was undoubtedly going to be the final battleground for both sides. Tiger's man, Su-hee, and the others were also mounted on their horses. They looked at the 5,000 Tatar cavalrymen opposite them, and an aura of death seemed to wash over them. This Amu Gulong is also an expert in commanding an army. It's a pity that such a person would become an enemy. Tiger's man looked at all this and said with emotion. Su-hee understood Tiger's man's meaning and also saw that he wanted to accept this good general. Because of this, he shook his head and said, "It's useless, Tiger's man. This Amu Gulong is deeply indebted to the great Khan of Tuachuobuhua. He will never surrender. Yes, if he doesn't surrender, then he can only die." Tiger's man also knew that in the face of Su-hee's persuasion, the other side had no intention of talking at all. This was enough to explain everything. If that was the case, then they would just fight. If they couldn't be friends, then they could only be enemies. At this time, Amu Gulong was also sweeping his eyes over the mercenaries opposite him. When he saw that the other side's army was also neat and orderly, and when he looked at them from afar, a wave of austere aura rushed over. He couldn't help but sigh. Mercenaries were indeed mercenaries. Just from the formation alone, many grassland cavalrymen could only achieve this much. Good formation and strong aura doesn't mean that you have powerful battle strength. Come, everyone, get ready. Today we will break the myth of the invincible war god. Everyone listen to my orders, follow this general, charge. Amu Gulong was still holding a 2-meter-long sword in his hand. With a loud shout, he waved his sword forward. The warhorse under him seemed to understand his words and was the first to leave the group and charge forward. The Tatar cavalrymen moved like thunder. Under the city walls of Tulu, they formed a fan and charged towards the mercenaries. As if they knew that the mercenaries had firearms, the 5,000 Tatar cavalrymen were not too concentrated. Instead, they were very scattered. Each cavalryman maintained a distance of at least 3 meters from each other as they charged straight for the kill. The earth trembled as if it was shaking. It was like a tsunami, making it impossible for people to regain their previous calmness. Seeing the enemy cavalrymen charging over with great morale, Tiger's man raised his right hand unhurriedly and loudly ordered, "Independent Regiment, 6 firearm battalions, listen to my orders. Wait until the enemy is 600 meters away before firing. Before that, no one is allowed to move without orders. Otherwise, you will be punished by military law." They had already decided on how to deal with these 5,000 Tatar cavalrymen during last night's meeting. That was to use firearms to heavily injure the enemy. Chapter 773. Although it wasn't difficult for the Independent Regiment and the Tatar Cavalry Regiment to deal with 5,000 Tatar cavalry, Tiger's man still made the decision to use firearms to defeat the enemy. He quoted Yang Qindong's words, "Since we can pay a smaller price, there is no need to make the soldiers suffer." Su-hee and Xian Honghai naturally agreed with this decision. However, they weren't without worries. For example, the effective range of the Type 81 rifle was around 800 meters, and the best shooting range was between 200 to 600 meters. If the enemy was allowed to reach this distance, wouldn't the army fall into chaos? After all, if one side's morale was high and the other side didn't move, it would be a test of the people's will. If things went wrong, the army's morale might collapse. If that happened, the enemy would take advantage of the situation and kill them. The result would be unimaginable. Tiger's man only smiled at this concern. You must have confidence in our soldiers. Speaking of which, isn't this a test? If they can't even withstand this little test, then they don't deserve to be a part of the mercenary army. They can't be called elites. Tiger's man made the final decision under his insistence. Now that the enemy was getting closer and closer, whether it was Su He or Xan Honghai, they all showed a trace of worry on their faces. They even observed the reactions and emotions of the surrounding soldiers more than once, afraid that some of them would be frightened by the aura and turn around to escape. The enemy was charging with full force and killing intent, but they had to stay in place and wait. This was indeed a test. Especially when the enemy was getting closer and closer, the neighing of the warhorses became clearer and clearer. Many of the warriors who were waiting on the spot revealed anxious expressions. Some of the warhorses even began to snort uneasily, lightly lifting their hooves and pacing around on the spot. Perhaps these warhorses were reminding their masters that it was time for them to charge as well? Anxiety could be seen on everyone's face. Some of the soldiers who weren't mentally strong turned pale, but fortunately there weren't any deserters. Even though the cavalry on the other side was getting closer and closer, and the pressure was getting stronger and stronger, most of them were still staring ahead. Without any orders, they didn't even draw their cavalry swords. Tiger's mane was also paying attention to the reaction of the army. He couldn't help but smile when he saw that the soldiers' expressions had changed, but their formation was still stable. It was said that the battlefield was the best place to test and train a warrior. It seemed that this was indeed the case. Of course, Hu Mang still had a sense of propriety when doing things. He knew that going too far was bad. Seeing that the pressure on the soldiers had reached a peak, he finally gave the order. Everyone listen up. Draw your swords. As soon as he shouted, the trumpeter beside him immediately blew a very short bugle call. This was one of the characteristics of mercenaries. Most of the time, they would use loud bugles to replace the traditional signal flags. Compared to the command flag, which they had to stare at closely, the sound of the bugle could be heard more clearly, allowing them to make the correct judgment and action immediately. Shwa. The sound of swords being drawn rang out in unison. Thousands of cavalry did the same action in unison, giving off a very imposing feeling. Just this one action instantly lifted the spirits of the soldiers who were originally in low spirits. At this moment, the Tatar cavalry on the other side was already 800 meters away, and they were still charging forward. Mu Gulong, who was charging in the middle of the troops, was flushed red with excitement. He originally thought that he would definitely lose this battle because he didn't have enough troops. In fact, he came this time with the mentality of facing death with equanimity. The only difference was that he wanted to see how many enemies he could kill in the end. However, he never thought that the mercenaries would be so careless and allow him to bring his troops closer. Could it be that the commander of the enemy didn't know that in order for the cavalry to display their strength, they had to constantly charge and increase their speed, relying on the advantage of speed to increase the power of their swords? Mu Gulong cursed the idiocy of the enemy commander in his heart. He became more and more excited as he saw the hope of victory. He believed that as long as he charged forward, once he entered the camp of the mercenaries, even if the enemy had guns, they wouldn't be able to do anything to him. Perhaps he would really become the first grassland army to defeat the mercenaries. Mu Gulong was very happy, and the cavalry following him were also very excited. They urged their horses to charge forward with all their might, increasing their speed to the maximum. They wanted to charge into the camp of the unprepared mercenaries, and then inflict heavy damage to them to obtain the final victory. Their speed was increased to the maximum, and the distance of 200 meters was covered in a flash. When the distance between the two sides reached 600 meters, Tiger's man's eyes narrowed, and he loudly gave the order to open fire. The sound of the bugle call to open fire broke the silence of the battlefield once again. The 6 battalions of independent soldiers holding the Type 81 rifles rode on their horses, holding their guns. They had already adjusted their breathing and even aimed at the enemy. Their right index finger moved, and the scene of 10,000 guns being fired at the same time appeared. Bang 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 bang, the sound of gunfire was loud, and the golden bullets flew toward the Tatar cavalry. Both sides collided on their respective paths, causing flowers to bloom and blood to splatter. When the bullets entered the human body, under the powerful force, some of the bullets directly sank into the human body, causing damage to the tissues. Some of the bullets simply rushed out and entered the body of the second cavalryman behind, causing continuous damage. The sudden sound of gunfire had already made Amu Gulong cry out in his heart. However, he didn't know much about the new continuous fire guns, so he thought that the mercenaries opposite him were like the great Ming Dynasty's Divine Arms Battalion, and that their guns could only shoot up to 100 meters away. The reason why the enemy opened fire now was just to create a kind of momentum and put a huge psychological pressure on his soldiers. It was precisely because he didn't think much of it that when he heard the gunfire, Amu Gulong immediately shouted to the cavalrymen beside him, "Everyone, don't panic. Their guns can't shoot that far. They're just trying to scare." Before he could finish his sentence, or rather he was only halfway through when the scene in front of him shocked him. He realized that many of his soldiers had fallen off their horses at this moment. Although some of them didn't fall off their horses, their bodies were already covered in blood, and more blood was flowing out. In the end, they lay on their horses, fainting from excessive blood loss or dying from blood loss. Open fire. Tiger's man was relieved when he saw that the first wave of enemies from afar had suffered countless casualties. At this time, if he led the army to counterattack, victory was already in his grasp. However, since he still had cannons in his hands, he naturally had to make good use of them. The sixth young master had said that wasting resources was an extremely shameful thing. A new military order was issued, and the loud bugle sounded again. The two 100mm sniper cannons at the rear that could shoot thousands of meters away were immediately loaded with shells. 2 seconds later, they flew out of the barrels and landed at the coordinates that had been adjusted long ago. Boom, boom. Two deafening sounds that could even shatter one's eardrums rang out and landed in the central area of the Tatar cavalrymen. Caught off guard, the cavalrymen in that area were blown off their horses, and they were dizzy from the bombardment. Especially at the place where the shells landed, a few unlucky cavalrymen didn't even have a corpse left. It was as if they had suddenly disappeared from the world. If the gunshots were just an appetizer that greatly hindered the Tatar cavalrymen's forward momentum, then the sudden appearance of the artillery was like a hammer that heavily smashed people's hearts, causing an unprecedented panic. Blow the bugle call, charge. Seeing that the enemy's formation was in chaos, and many cavalrymen were even circling around in place, not knowing where was safe, Tiger's man knew that the opportunity to launch the attack had come. Immediately he shouted loudly. When the loud bugle call resounded in front of the vast land, countless mercenary cavalrymen began to charge forward. They shouted loudly and released the unhappiness in their hearts just now. They waved their sabers and directly rushed towards the Tatar cavalrymen's formation that was already in chaos. At the rear of the Tatar cavalrymen, the two cannons extended in the direction of attack, and the two shells landed here, making the cavalrymen who were walking at the back feel the threat. The two cannons caused at least 100 casualties. The Tatar cavalrymen had never seen such powerful weapons before, so they scattered and fled. They didn't dare to gather together and slowly advance like before. The rear army was in chaos and the middle army was also in chaos. This bad sign started to spread to the entire battlefield. Without the support of the middle army and the rear army, Amu Gulong, who was in the front army, seemed to have become a lone army. Looking at the less than 500 cavalrymen around him and the countless mercenary cavalrymen rushing toward him, he was like a fugitive who had walked into a dead end. There was no door to heaven. "General, what should we do?" Seeing that the middle of the army and the front of the army had already lost contact, a guard beside Amu Gulong anxiously asked. At this moment, Amu Gulong's face revealed a firm expression. He gritted his teeth and made the final decision of his life. Kill with me, fight with them. At this time, Amu Gulong made the decision to repay the kindness with his life. Based on the care that the Great Khan had given him in the past, he couldn't choose to surrender to the mercenaries like the others. Since that was the case, he could only fight with his life on the line. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.